All right, we're ready? Good afternoon, everybody. This is Councilmember Gilbert Cedillo. This is the Housing Committee for Wednesday, June 21st, 2017. We are in room 1060. 1060 of City Hall. I recognize it's 115. We're at 200 North Spring Street, Los Angeles, California. I recognize my colleagues are here, Mr. Marquise Harris-Dawson, Mr. Senator Curran Price, Councilmember Paul Koretz, and that's it. That constitutes a quorum. We are prepared to move forward. I am going to exercise Chair's prerogative and move to items 2, 3, and 4, which will be handled so that we can accommodate Mr. Koretz's schedule. Before we do that, though, we are going to do public comment and multiple public comment. The maximum time for that, Council, is for 2 minutes for multiple public comment. Total.
And are we doing general public first?
Yes.
Public first. 1 minute.
1 minute general public comment. So we're going to start with that, and I'm going to call up a list. Thank you all. We have an overflow audience, and I thank all of you who are in the overflow room for working with us, and I thank all of you who are here with us today. I know that it's a warm afternoon, and we're going to do all that we can to get us promptly through this agenda that I'm confident we will do that. Let's start with Judy Goldman from Venice, Dal Hunter from Venice, and Kelly Day from Los Angeles. Please come up. Hello.
Do I have 1 minute or 2 minutes? 1 minute? Can you hear me? Okay. I'm Judy Goldman, co-founder of Keep Neighborhoods First. Since this group first started around my dinner table 3 years ago, I've seen dozens of my neighbors and friends lose their homes. I've also heard hundreds of similar stories from residents all over our city, from Hollywood to Echo Park to downtown. Awful stories about landlords harassing and abusing tenants in order to convert their units to short-term rentals. RSO families are being illegally evicted and pushed to the streets, and entire RSO buildings are being converted to make more room for the more lucrative short-term rentals. I'm confident that data will show that a tremendous amount of affordable housing has already been lost. But today, you will hear horror stories from the tenants themselves. I urge you to quickly adopt sensible and balanced short-term rentals, regulations, and unequivocally protect RSO housing. Please prohibit vacation rentals and adopt a 60 to 90-day cap. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Del Hunter White. I'm here to represent the many people I know who are too afraid of landlord retaliation or can't leave work in the middle of the day. I've lived in my Venice apartment for 23 years. A year and a half ago, my 8-unit building was sold to a foreign investor. He was successful in getting rid of 5 long-term tenants. There are 3 of us left, and they're trying to get rid of us. The other 5 apartments are now Airbnb hotel rooms. My home life now is a nightmare. Strangers coming in and going, knocking on my door in the middle of the night, smoking, drinking in the courtyard, leaving the front gate open. And worst of all, the property has deteriorated. The Airbnb people leave trash all over the property, resulting in an infestation of rats and roaches. 2 weeks ago, my apartment was invaded by rats. When I asked the property manager to call an exterminator, he called me an effing bitch. I fear for my health and safety. The property owners are doing this because they know they can get away with it and the city won't do anything.
Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Day, and I've been living at the Ellison in Venice Beach for a little over 2 years. What these people are saying is true. I live it every day. We have of 58 RSO units. We have 18 long-term tenants that remain. The security in our building is horrendous. A few days ago, a man actually got into our building and jumped off our roof. I had the unfortunate experience of actually hearing his body hit the pavement and seeing him with several broken bones laying on the outside of my apartment. My neighbors are being harassed. I know of two specifically with eviction on false claims by the landlord. The current situation with the tenant that's being evicted right now or in those proceedings is he's one of the lowest paying renters, and they're basically trying to get him out due to that to make more money on the.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Billy Mintz, Bruce Kajewski. Hey, Bruce. And Dalmy Pettis.
Thank the Lord I do not have to follow Bruce. He's a hard act to follow. I've written my statement so that I can be in your minute. I'm living at the Ellison for 4 years in Venice Beach that is illegally being converted into a hotel. I've been harassed by management and ongoing management threatening eviction, turnaround, and constant noise of unpermitted construction, rowdiness of guests that have no regard for residents, bugs, and rodents. It's been a living nightmare, and no city officials have been helpful regardless of several attempts. I am also a journalist with National Geographic and investigative documentarian. I was the last journalist to meet with the Obama administration, where I interviewed the Secretary of HUD, Julian Castro, so my knowledge of the housing crisis is very in-depth. My specialty in investigative journalism is centered around investigating corruption in municipalities where collusion exists. When you put everyone on the wall and you rewatch their backgrounds and relationships, a pretty clear picture evolves. It should not take a journalist to uncover matters that are so easy to see, especially in plain view like this one. I look forward to speaking with you further during my investigation and hope for your transparency in such matters. I'm curious to know how my landlord and others are getting away with such illegal activity, and I'm positive the answers lie among those involved in this room.
Thank you.
My name is Bruce Kiefsky. I've lived in the Ellison for 40 years. I started off at paying 40 cents a square foot. It's now $4 a square foot. And I'm okay with that. My neighbors are paying $5, $6 a square foot. And we can deal with that. We know that the Venice that we knew is gone. But I would prefer Snapchat, Google, digital domain as neighbors rather than an ever-changing host of tourists looking for a bargain. We deal with developers who buy RSO buildings and then stealthily convert them to hotels. Our own slumlord, who you all know, he's infamous on two coasts, Lance J. Robbins. He's been waging war against tenants for 30 years. So we're asking you to, you're like the Center for Disease Control. Greed is never going away. We accept it, right? But it's got to be regulated. And that's your job, is to regulate that greed. It's like a disease. It starts off as malaria. It has outbreaks when you have the illegal youth hostels in the 80s and 90s. Now we see it creeping back in the hotel conversions. But it's like Ebola in that it's contagious. And so that's what we hope that you'll protect us from.
Hello.
Dalmy,
Hello, everybody. My name is Telmi Perez.
Cynthia Straithman, hold your time, and Becky Dennison.
I'm with the LA Human Right to Housing Collective. I'm here today as a tenant on behalf of tenants in the city of Los Angeles. Short-term rentals is absolutely a housing issue. It's a tenants' rights issue, and we're seeing tenants being pushed out of their apartments, their RSO apartments, for those apartments to be turned into hotels. Every single day, if you go to the Superior Court of the City of Los Angeles, you see families upon families being evicted from their homes. It is a terrible crisis. It is a mental health crisis for those families. Trust me, I've worked with many, many, many families over the last 12 years, counseling people going through eviction, and it is a terrible thing. Completely disrupts the lives of renters, of families, of children. I've seen it happen. In South Park, which is just a stone's throw away from the office where I work, I see families being evicted almost on a daily, weekly basis. And I've had friends come visit from San Diego and say, come to our hotel. It's an Airbnb in South Park where a family that I work with used to stay. So I just want to say, please, 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 common sense legislation that prohibits the turning of RSO units into Airbnb or short-term rentals.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Cynthia Strathman. I'm at SAGE. We work on tenant rights and healthy housing. We support low-income tenants and help protect them from illegal evictions, including unwarranted Ellis Act evictions, and from unhealthy conditions that are promulgated by negligent landlords. We're especially concerned right now about losing housing to short-term rentals. We have seen, folks that we know in other parts of town lose housing to short-term rentals that had been affordable for lower-income families. We really feel like we need to preserve these through a sensible home sharing ordinance that prohibits RSOs, that limits it to primary residence, and that's platform-based. And we're really happy with what the city has so far suggested along these lines. We're concerned that the cap on days be reasonable so that there's no incentive to rent a unit on a short-term rental instead of as a regular housing unit. Our residents really rely on housing. They are not making money from short-term rentals, but we have seen them real short on housing options. So, thank you.
Hello, I'm Becky Dennison. I work with Venice Community Housing, and I also want to urge this committee to support a strong short-term rentals ordinance that prohibits any use of RSO housing. I know there was a question about what the impact is, and I just ran really quickly the buildings on the Venice Boardwalk and found more than 250 currently registered RSO units being used as short-term rentals, which is about 20% of the citywide Ellis numbers, so just on the Venice Boardwalk. We don't just see this in Venice. The city attorney filed a lawsuit on 125 units in Venice and in and near Hollywood. Only 4 of them had been Ellised and then illegally reused. The rest of them were registered RSO units that had been completely converted to short-term rentals. So it is a housing stock issue, and it's also a tenant rights issue. Tenants, if RSO units remain available, are subject to push-out, but also will end up renting their unit illegally in violation of their lease and put them at more risk of displacement and eviction. So it's both a housing stock issue and a tenant rights issue, and we hope you'll support that element, the entire ordinance and particularly that element, as the Housing Committee.
Thank you. Amanda Seward, Alejandro Santiago, Alejandra, and Jose from the Tenants Union. Jose.
Huarcas. G-U-A-R-C-A-S.
Okay.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
Mi nombre es Alejandra Santiago. Vivo en el 326 y medio North New Hampshire Avenue, Los Ángeles, 90004. Gracias. Estoy aquí. Yo no sé mucho de leyes, sé que aquí se discuten muchas leyes, sé que es importante, pero yo solo estoy aquí como una simple ama de casa que hace poco más de un año vivía muy tranquila en su apartamento que está bajo control de renta. Una nueva compañía compró. Y estoy aquí para decir que muchas personas piensan que los que vivimos bajo control de renta estamos salvados, no tenemos ningún problema, y no es así, señor. Tenemos el problema que cuando un nuevo dueño, una nueva compañía compra, nos empieza a acosar de manera muy fuerte, muy dura. Éramos 12 apartamentos, hasta hace un mes quedábamos 3. La última oferta hemos rechazado aquí mi vecino y yo, el señor Huarcas, 20, 30, 40 y 50. Nuestra compañera hasta hace un mes aceptó la última oferta, pero estoy aquí para decirles que me gustaría mucho que Jaisi y ustedes, el concilio de la ciudad, fueran más claros en sus leyes para protegernos a nosotros, los inquilinos de a pie, gente que con mucho sacrificio pagamos nuestra renta mes a mes. No queremos que nos regalen nada, solamente que nos apoyen con sus leyes claras por los dueños. Al final, con control de renta o sin control de renta, nos acosan, nos intimidan, nos ofenden, porque esa es la palabra, nos ofenden, nos hacen sentir que por ser, sobre todo, inquilinos, muchas veces me he preguntado en este poco más de un año que tengo viviendo ahí, que si yo fuera una ama de casa anglosajona, me hubieran sometido a todo lo que he padecido.
Gracias.
A pesar de rechazar la oferta, lo único que estoy pidiendo es que Jaise y ustedes sean más claros hasta dónde es el límite de derechos de nosotros como inquilinos y de los dueños para protegernos.
Disculpe. Okay. Gracias. Señor.
Sí.
Sí.
Yo vengo, buenos días, mi nombre es José Huarcas. También vengo del 326 de la New Hampshire y también con el mismo problema. Hasta hoy en mañana recibí la llamada del dueño pidiéndome de que él quiere que yo le reciba el dinero que él me está dando, al cual yo no estoy aceptando nada. Yo quiero que, por favor, la ciudad y también el Departamento de Vivienda hagan algo al respecto con este acoso, porque ya es demasiado que los dueños salgan con las manos por alto y nosotros salgamos por debajo. No es justo que a nosotros nos pongan en una situación tan difícil y que nosotros tengamos que pagar los platos rotos de otras gentes. La verdad, yo creo que el Housing Department está haciendo de la vista gorda con todas estas situaciones que están sucediendo con los tenants. Por favor, pongan más atención.
Gracias. Thank you. More cards? And then the others are all specific. Right, okay, Kate? Kate, you say? And Mickey Jackson? Kate? Mickey Jackson, please. Oh, they're coming. I know. We're here.
My name's Kate Usell. These measures are far short of what is needed, to begin to fix some of the housing problems the city has fostered and allowed to fester. Los Angeles is years behind other cities in actually effectively tracking the effects of the Ellis Act gentrification, excessive construction of luxury housing, and other ways our city is displacing the 80% of the non-wealthy residents. One-to-one affordable unit replacement doesn't fix the affordable housing losses. Access impacts of excessive luxury buildings and affordable housing losses is an important impact.
Thank you.
This is Mickey
Not that you
Jackson.
need
Mickey
the
Jackson.
record.
Yes, for the record. I was at a plum meeting about a year ago, and I was shocked, as was the chair, Mr. Padilla, to find that the city had not been tracking the effects of the Ellis Act. There was no tracking for people who were expelled. There was no tracking for loss of affordable housing. There was just no tracking, and this seems just very convenient for a city that's rather addicted to luxury housing. And so since then, the city has begun to put into place what I consider rather feeble attempts to track. And one of the reasons this and most of the tracking and everything we find in EIRs is feeble is that it does not track cumulative effect. It acts as though each building lost is in a vacuum. Each unit lost is in a vacuum. Each building built is somewhere in the Sahara Desert. It doesn't accumulate its impacts all down the street. And so this tracking system is very ineffective, and I hope we fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. This closes public comment. Thank you, everyone. We are now at items.
Mr. Chair, did you want to take items 2, 3, 4
Yes.
together? Briefly, item 2, city planning report relative to possible zoning code changes to strengthen enforcement of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance and Ellis Act. Item 3 is a Housing Community Investment Department report regarding the Ellis Act. And item 4 is a motion, Corretz-Weezar, relative to amending the municipal code to prohibit the approval of condominium conversions under certain situations.
Okay. We can do the public comment first? Or Okay. Okay.
Well, good afternoon, council members. My name is Matt Gillespie. I'm with our housing unit within the Department of City Planning. We're very happy to be here to talk about our report dated May 31st. that covers, I think, 4 council files, 6 issues within 4 council files that pertain to RSO Ellis issues that are sort of within the realm of the Planning Department and Land Use. This follows Housing and Community Investment Department report dated April 15th, 2016, that it reviewed RSO issues under their jurisdiction in the RSO. The report put off several issues that are more under the Planning Department's jurisdiction for this report. And I will just be walking through these 6 issues one by one, if that's okay. The first issue is asking the department to look at the feasibility of withholding issuing demo permits for RSO units until all discretionary or ministerial permits for new construction are obtained. I believe the concern is that oftentimes folks are going for demolition permits before they even have approval for a follow-up project, and in some cases they may not be able to obtain those approvals because it's a discretionary request. So we looked into this issue, and actually we're surprised to find I did not know that the Department of Building and Safety actually has been withholding demo permits until entitlements are in place for about a year now, based on a policy memo they issued in July of 2016, I believe. So this is a policy that's been established at the building counter for demo permits. It's really based on CEQA. It's based on the idea that we don't want to we should look at the demolition and the new project together for environmental purposes, and we should not separate those. So we want to withhold the demo permit until we know that there's a follow-up project. So they're actually requiring an affidavit to be signed by property owners or applicants before testifying that they do not have any future entitlements before they'll issue a building permit. So our report talks about that and says if the City Council would like us to codify that current practice through an ordinance, that is certainly something that we can do, working with the Building Department, the City Attorney's Office, HCID, on an ordinance that would essentially codify the current practice and likely put some parameters around it rather than just a policy memo. So that's the first issue. The second issue is having the department look at our practices when we're looking at condominium conversions. There's an existing requirement that the planning department, every time we get a condo conversion, we have to look at vacancy rates and we have to look at the cumulative impact on the rental market to ensure that the condo conversion is not going to have negative impacts on the surrounding rental market. I believe the motion asked us to look at the feasibility of the vacancy rates in particular, and as well as how we do that impact. How do we know what a cumulative impact is in place? And this is a challenge. We've talked to our planners who do this and believe that they would benefit from sort of clear guidelines. So what we're proposing on this item is to develop a criteria, a protocol for exactly what should be looked at to determine what is the cumulative impact across the board of the department, so we don't have individual planners making their own judgments. There should be some set criteria, we believe, that would help guide their decision making, including getting data from HCID on the number of Ellis and RSO evictions in the neighborhood, and how many RSO units there are in the neighborhood, what the percentages are, what the rents, just more information, how to obtain that information, and what sort of thought process they should go through. So that's our recommendation there, is to develop this protocol. The third item.
Maybe Matt, this is an opportunity for me to intervene here a little bit also well on this item. This is Claire Bowen, City Planning. I think this item is also relevant to number 4 on your agenda, really talking about the vacancy rates. And I think as the report outlines, that one of our challenges with the vacancy rates has been our challenge in actually getting the information from DWP. And we look forward to, I think, working with DWP and working with you to identify potentially an alternative source if we're not able to use DWP. Each source has its problems. There is no kind of ideal source. We also have Jack Sal from our demographic unit here if you had any specific questions about the different kinds of sources. But we look forward to being able to report back to you, hopefully in some short order, as directed by you, as to maybe some alternatives for vacancy rates if we're not able to reach some agreement with DWP.
Yes, thank you, Claire. And as you noted, that item is specifically called out as item 4 on the agenda. The third item in our report is asking us to look at an actual cap on demolitions of RSO units in particular, that would essentially delay Demolition permits, we don't believe the Ellis Act. Again, our hands are tied, city's hands are tied with the Ellis Act. If somebody wants to truly get out of the rental business and demolish their building, we don't believe we have the legal authority to do that. I think we have some HSID lawyers here who can expand upon that. But some cities have put in barriers to demolition, conditional use permits, or delays until the following year. We have some concerns about a policy that would issue a blanket demolition cap, because it would not be able to take into account, I think, good projects from bad projects. To put simply, you know, are they demolishing just a small amount of units to get affordable housing units? That might be something we don't want to slow down. We have to judge this according to the housing crisis, the very low vacancy rates we have. So, and then with the caveat that, again, we don't think we could stop demolitions. It would be a delay, and that may not address the issues that we're trying to be addressed through the motion. So on this issue, we're not recommending a cap on demolitions of RSO units. The fourth item is asking the department to expand housing replacement requirements that are now in effect under density bonus projects per a state law that was passed a couple years ago, AB 2222. We're now with density bonus projects, we're requiring one-to-one replacement of low-income units if they are lost as part of a density bonus project. The motion asks us to expand that concept of sort of no net loss, as it can be called. And actually, in the meantime, since when the motion happened, Measure JJJ actually did expand that to zone change projects and general plan amendment projects, where now those entitlements also have to have a no net loss. But there are actually additional entitlement pathways that we're seeing developers avail themselves to now post JJJ that we believe we could also expand this to. And in fact, we just released an ordinance called the Value Capture Ordinance that actually expands this no net loss concept to a couple other entitlement pathways where the city is giving density or offering increased floor area or density. We believe when we're giving things away, we should not have a no net loss on those projects. So that is an ordinance that was released a couple weeks ago and will work its way through Planning Commission and in front of the committee in the following weeks and months. So we believe that's actually covered and is in the pipeline. The fifth item is asking the department to review the impact of the small lot subdivision ordinance. This is planning department ordinance that allows for multifamily lots to essentially be subdivided and have small individual for sale housing units built on those properties. The concern in the motion is that this is leading to a loss of RSO units. The motion asks us to look at review the numbers, to actually look at the data. And unfortunately, we provided some information that there's been about 29 small lot subdivision projects within a 5-year period that did result in RSO units. Unfortunately, we did not have the data, and as a housing person, this pains me to say, we just, in the planning department, just started collecting the data maybe a year ago that will allow us to have a greater insight on exactly what's happening. How many units are we losing? What are we gaining? What is the average sort of loss versus gain? And we just didn't have the data in front of us to be able to report that in this report, and we feel like it'd be premature to jump to a policy conclusion based on insufficient data. We're very happy to come back once we do have more data available and discuss what options might be available. But on this one, we didn't feel comfortable making a recommendation without the appropriate data. The final item we were asked to look at was having to do with hotel conversions, and this was expanded also to deal with short-term rentals, the issues you heard about this morning or this afternoon. So it's sort of two separate issues. Hotel conversions is something that we think we have limited authority, again, under the Ellis Act. A landlord has the right to get out of the rental business and get into the hotel business. They do have to convert the entire building to make that a lawful withdrawal. So we may have limited authority on what we can do with hotel conversions, but we do have more authority with short-term rentals, and really we're focused in on this issue with the home sharing ordinance that's in front of the Planning Land Use Committee and City Council right now. We feel the restrictions on the RSO units, the much more effective enforcement we believe we'll have by being able to go after the advertising and working to shut these illegal listings down will greatly reduce the incentive to convert these units on a one-on-one basis. And additionally, there's something in the back of the home sharing ordinance that I think really gets to this conversion concern. We are seeing some developers, property owners, try to convert their building to something called a transient occupancy residential structure. This is a definition we created in the 1990s, really about extended stay hotels. This was the the Marriott's, extended stay hotels wanting to have a kitchen, medium to short-term stays. Some folks are now using that as a way to try to convert their building and allow short-term rentals, which is really not what that was intended for. We think it's a much different situation to convert a whole building to a sort of a Marriott or a Hyatt versus just picking off units one by one and allowing that to occur. So we're actually, the ordinance, the draft ordinance proposes completely banning the conversion of apartment buildings altogether to these transient occupancy structures. If you'd like to build one from scratch, that's okay, but converting, we did not feel like that's the intention of that definition. So that would not be allowed under the proposed ordinance. And with that, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have. We've also got representatives from HSID. We've got our demographics unit here to talk about vacancy rates, and thank you very much.
Okay. Mr. Price. Senator Price.
Thank you for the report on all these items, and thank you for the testimony that we've heard from neighbors and friends also. I want to be clear. I certainly want to do all I can to strengthen the enforcement of the Rent Stabilization Ordinance and Ellis Act. I think it is critically important, especially in many areas of our communities. I was curious, though, about the item 2, withholding demolition permits, and I certainly understand the desire to exercise restraint, but we got to have some balance. I've had a couple projects in my district, for example, that we've been trying to demolish for years. They each, in fact, have development plans, former redevelopment properties, in fact. It's just really been a source of frustration not being able to move these projects forward sooner. So, again, while I appreciate the need, the desire to exercise restraint in situations where there are no occupants, I think especially we ought to be seeing how we can help expedite demolition, especially when projects have been planned and approved and are waiting to move forward. So that's my only cautionary request, Mr. Chairman. Otherwise, I appreciate their efforts, and I think that we're in the right direction, providing the kind of protection that's important for families and projects like this.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think most of the issues in these items have been handled appropriately. The one area where I still have some questions are condo conversions. I mean, they're not the most prominent cause of a loss of affordable housing at the moment, but they're part of the sort of steady drip, drip, drip of erosion of our RSO housing stock and displacing tenants, et cetera. And in dealing with a pending case in my district, it's become apparent that the city's housing policies, as we try to cover every angle, somewhat clash in terms of housing ownership competing directly with our desire to protect affordability. So I think we need to look at how we can address that. I don't think we'll be able to build our way out of the crisis if we keep losing affordable housing as we build new affordable housing. So the big question is the 5% vacancy issue. We have an outdated number. So how do we come up with a current number, since the 5% level is obviously an issue with our current policies, but we don't have a process for updating them. It's very likely that we're under 5%. So if we had that number and we were applying it, we would be halting our approval of condo conversions. But since it probably exists, but we don't have any way to corroborate that right now, it doesn't work. So what are the prospects of city planning coming up with a new methodology for calculation before, I don't know, end of summer, some reasonable period of time?
Claire Bowens. Oh.
Or let me ask that in another way, is why don't we shift the burden so that it's not on us having to ascertain whether it's 5 or half or less, but that unless it's shown that it's not, then there's no conversion.
Claire Bowen, City Planning.
Gets us to the same result.
Sure.
think if we were to pursue that avenue or course of direction, we would still need to be able to provide developers with what would be the expected standard upon which they would have to evaluate that. I think that is, unfortunately for us, the challenge. Again, maybe Jack can get into a little bit more detail, but so we found is that the reason we relied on DWP in the past is that it is actually the only actual source of data that provides us, down really actually at the unit level. It actually is the city's data that is able to help us determine, exactly what is kind of the vacancy rate for both rental and home ownership, where all the other kind of data sources, whether you're looking at real estate companies that publish vacancy rate data, or in American Community Survey, or current population surveys, they all simply are surveys, and they do tend to also lack or lag in time. For example, the American Community Survey right now, the latest data we have is as of 2015, and again, it's about a 3% sampling. So these are kind of some of the challenges in front of us, is that there's not a good, reliable data source for us. DWP really is the kind of the best source. It's something that Jack relied on for many years. It's what's defined in the actual zoning code itself, but we have been unable to get that information from DWP, and we've been working with the mayor's office to try to work with DWP to try to get that information. We'll continue to try to do so, but we can also we can come back and report back to you, again, some of the pros and cons of these other data sources, even though they're not perfect, and we could define perhaps what we might think could be the best one. Jack, do you have anything you want to add, or?
So what are the commercially available data sources that we could rely on?
The American Community Survey, Current Population Survey, and the American Housing Survey. American Housing is in charge by HUD, Housing and Urban Development Department, and they are all sampling surveys. The only other real estate company that usually everybody uses the Zero, but they're still based on the CPS, the Current Population Survey, which is part of ACS. And that sampling percentage is only less than 1%, which means about only 1,000 units being sampled in the entire city of Los Angeles. And we have about 1.413 million housing units in total.
What's the most current of all those choices?
The date for
is there anything more current than what we're using now?
Because of the definition of vacancy, we are defined by the Census Bureau. It has to be a 10 months vacant period. So it's difficult to not single database can cover the entire 10 months. If we want the most recent period, then we will lack of the 10 months period. So the most recent one, 2016. For the sampling one, DWP, we can have up to date 2017.
So what's the holdup in getting them to work with us?
I think it's their own staffing. They did give us some numbers recently because we kept pressuring them. The number was about 7%, and they were saying that they hadn't had the staff to adequately kind of go through and review those numbers. They felt like there was a lot of units that they had not appropriately counted, and they needed more resources to be able to do that, and they were not promising that we could have that within a year.
So what process could we undergo to actually make that happen?
Why don't you call DWP up there?
Are there folks present from DWP that can answer that question?
There you come.
Good afternoon, council members. Richard Thomas, Assistant General Counsel with LADWP. I was in the adjacent room. I think what we can do is certainly work with city planning and determine how we best do go about providing information. I think there are some limitations because of the system that the department developed was not obviously designed with an eye towards this issue in mind. This was not something that is essential or even very integral to the department's operations. And so that was not the system that was developed. As was indicated, there are some issues in terms of the ability of the system to capture information in the manner in which city planning is now needing it in order to determine vacancy rates. That's just not what the Department of Water and Power is concerned with in terms of utility operations. So we will need to see what we can do to assist them, but there are some limitations just because of the way the
information is gathered.
But there's nothing that would make that impossible, I presume.
I don't think it would make it impossible. I think the issue becomes one of, as I think was referenced, the number of units and the ability to process that much information has a cost to it. And I guess the question for city planning and for the council is one of whether the cost associated with doing that for several million units, over 1 million units, what's the cost of that relative to other sources of information?
Claire Bowen, City Planning. I would just like to just offer that while we've been focusing here on the need to get vacancy rate data for the purposes of determining whether a condominium conversion should happen or not. One of the the main reasons the department has relied on the vacancy rates over the last number of years is because that is how Jack and his team every year actually prepare the population estimates for the city, which actually one could argue is a paramount, as a really important number for all of us in order to be able to have an accurate number of what our population number is on an annual basis. And again, it really looks at the population of the vacancy rates that are important part of that calculation.
So we have an outdated number that's, what, a year and a half old? How'd we do it a year and a half ago, and why can't we do the same thing?
I'm going to let Jack answer that. He had to do a workaround at that time.
The purpose is different. The vacancy that we tracked before, that it was trying to find out the movement, the change, the growth change about each community plan areas. So we track our housing units vacancies. But this is concentrating on renter occupied or owner occupied multiple family housing units. So it's kind of not the purpose of before.
So are you saying you were doing a separate project that happened to provide that data that you're not doing now?
There is no data now. There's no data now. The one that I requested from the DRP, and they sent us a file that was not the 10 months idling vacancy rate. Just we found out further through the email. It was a snapshot for 1 day only. So, and that was the reason why the recent release of the vacancy rate is higher than the historical trend.
So
because the DWP, I think Richard can explain more, because there's a system conversion from mainframe to the PC version, and some program in there, algorithm in there lost. This is what I learned from DWP, and that's how I know.
Can you explain that?
I think that this may require the IT professionals to go into more detail than I can. As it's been explained to me, I think fundamentally what it comes down to is, again, the department does not gather the data relative to vacancy rates or who is the owner or who is whether it's a renter. The department does not gather that information for purposes of satisfying city planning's needs. So when the new system was put in, certain information that may have been collected historically is not being collected in the new system the department has. And so the information just isn't captured in the manner in which it was previously. That's the simple version of it. I think in order for the council to really get the full version, I think it would require the folks who run the IT organization to explain in more detail. But fundamentally, it's certain information that used to be captured was not anymore because it was not necessary for the department's operations, for DWP's operations. And I don't think there was, you can always look back and say you should have coordinated more fully, but it's very difficult to capture information. And the more information you capture, the more issues you have with capturing it. And so the department made a choice to have their system run their operations, the utilities operations, not, other city departments. This was not something I think that was, considered in terms of building out the department's data system.
But it was a historic function that was performed by the department.
It was, I think, a function that, as I'm understanding, that may have been requested in the past, but it was not something that was considered, I think, core to the needs of the customer billing system that was put in place by the department.
Okay. Let me see, Mr. Marquise. Can we get city attorney and housing up on number 2, number 3, number 4? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon, council members. Just wanted to report back on, I'm sorry, Robert Moore from City Attorney's Office. We wanted to report back.
Excuse me, use the mic. And can we have somebody shut that door, please?
Apologies. Deputy City Attorney Robert Moore, City Attorney's Office. We wanted to report back on 2 items that were specifically requested that our office look into. One was whether or not further remedies could be instituted into the current Ellis Act provisions that the city has in place. The second item was whether or not we could better conform or mirror our city provisions with the state Ellis Act. First and foremost, the state obviously occupies the field as it relates to the Ellis Act. So the state law specifies and delineates the full scope of all remedies that are available related to the Ellis Act. That does include private rights of action for tenants in certain situations. That also includes remedies available to the city itself for violations of the Ellis Act. Our provisions, but for 2 minor areas, do mirror the state act perfectly, so to speak. There are 2 areas where we could modify our act that would provide greater clarity, as well as expand upon the rights for tenants. One area, currently our act allows for those tenants that have timely requested the ability to consider returning to their residence. It allows them a 5-year, essentially a right of first refusal. The state code allows for 10 years. So that is something that we can modify in our provisions to allow for 10 years right of first refusal to those tenants that, again, timely request that ability. The second item is something that we have, it's essentially a requirement or a affirmative action that is given to tenants that are involved in an unlawful detainer action. It is an affirmative action, or affirmative defense, that they can raise when their owner has not complied with the various requirements that they are set forth in our provisions. The RSO already has sort of a blanket provision that sets forth that requirement and that ability for tenants. However, for clarity's sake for tenants, we can put that specifically in the Ellis Act provisions, therefore specifying that we have the provisions where the sets forth what the owners are required to do and the timely basis, the notices, etc. And then there is this affirmative defense that tenants can raise in any sort of unlawful detainer action should their owner or they contend that their owner not comply with those requirements. In addition to those 2 minor tweaks, there is an item that is currently pending before Planning Committee. That is something that our office can look into the feasibility of, and if it is determined to be feasible, to perhaps amend the ordinance as well. It relates to the decision by an owner to either subdivide or convert to condos, where that has either been filed with the city or approved by the city, and then a tenant comes into the property thereafter. Under our current provisions, relocation benefits would be waived by the tenant should the owner then decide to Ellis. Recently, the Ellis provisions were amended to provide for relocation assistance, which is the outside entity that then helps the tenants find the new housing. But this relates to the relocation benefits, the amounts that are set forth that each tenant's household would be entitled to for the eviction as it relates to Ellis. So that is something, if instructed to, we can look into the feasibility and, again, if it's determined to be, amend accordingly.
Okay. Anybody? Because I don't see why we shouldn't do all those three things.
Question of the city.
Yes, sir.
Now, I've just noticed in my neighborhood, it's hard to miss, that a number of, in some cases, probably historic properties, certainly older buildings, have been demolished and rental housing replacing them using the Ellis Act. And I'm not sure if they were condo conversions and then claimed they couldn't sell them, or if they just directly decided to rent them. What are exactly our legal options? The company that's doing this and certainly devastated my neighborhood, are they in the right? Is there anything we can do to try and halt that particular activity?
So it's important, council member, and that people realize that it is essentially apples and oranges when we're talking about the Ellis Act, and whether the owners can remove from the rental market, and then kind of the secondary issue is what they do with it after. As far as
and these are all demolitions I'm talking about.
But again, even with the demolitions, as far as assuming that these properties were initially Ellis, that in and of itself is something that the owners have the absolute right to do. Thereafter is something that it would, I believe, come at a planning land use restrictions as far as what is done with the property thereafter.
So the fact that they have a new building in a couple of years and re-rent it, there's no violation there, potentially.
I understand the issue now. It would depend upon the time frame that they come back into the rental market, whether it's within the 2 years from the removal, 5 years, or thereafter. It would also depend on whether or not the property itself was an RSO building that was demolished beforehand. But these are all the different questions for that.
So as an example, I'm sure they're all RSO buildings, and they're put back on the market as quickly as they can be demolished, built, and re-rented.
Good afternoon, Councilperson. This is Anna Ortega, Director of Rent Stabilization. If the demolition and building of new rental housing on a property that had RSO units is permitted under the Ellis Act, they can demolish and build new. What happens, though, under the law is that if they offer these new units for rent within 5 years, all of those units are subject to the Rent Stabilization Ordinance. So those units that you're seeing in your district, those properties, assuming it all happened within 5 years, are now RSO units.
So in other words, they Ellis out people paying $800 a month, and they become RSO units to the new tenants that are paying $3,000 a month, which is actually has happened in just about every case I'm talking about.
But yes, that could be, and it is permissible to do that under the Ellis Act. Now, what this committee and the council recently did with the amendments that just went into effect on June 4th, there are provisions where they can get an exemption from making the new units subject to the RSO if they provide a certain number of affordable units. So under the old rules, they would have to provide the number of units demolished or 20% of the new units, whichever is lower. With the new amendments that the council recently approved, it's been enhanced to be the greater of those numbers. So the number of units demolished or 20% of the new units, whichever is greater. So that is requiring a greater number of affordable units in order to get an exemption from the RSO. But yes, they can demolish and rebuild new units.
But again, the exemption from the RSO only means that once they've charged the $3,000, they can't charge $4,000 the next year. They just have to increase it to 3% from the now unaffordable rent.
So then they're not exempt, they're subject. But yes, you're correct. They are subject at market.
Yeah, it's painful, but it doesn't leave us much in the way of options to slow that down.
Did you want me to discuss item 3?
Yes.
Okay. All right. There is a motion that has requested the Housing Department to report to council offices about their Ellis inventory and get notified when an Ellis application is received by the department. We actually do this whenever requested by council offices, but we've started doing it on a much more formal basis. So I believe we've met with everyone on this committee except one office. We've given them an inventory of their RSO units. We've given them reports on the citywide totals from 2001 through 2017, a breakdown by council district so everyone can see where their activity is compared to the rest of the city, and reports for the council district by year, the total number of units removed, the unit breakdown about whether they're vacant or occupied, and a complete list of addresses and APN numbers, the data filing, and the number of units withdrawn. So we've initiated those reports to each council office. We began with the Housing Committee, and we'll be expanding that to all of the council members.
Okay. Yes. Got it. Any comments, sir? Okay. So let's do public comment now. We're going to do individual and then multiple public comment. Carlos Aguilar, 2 and 4, please.
This is comment on item 2. Carlos Aguilar, Coalition for Economic Survival. Extending one-for-one replacement requirements, withholding demo permits until all other permits are obtained, capping condo conversions and demolitions, and restricting the small lot subdivisions are steps that should be taken. Unfortunately, the report is extremely thin on action. We're glad that planning thoughtfully looked at these issues, but we need some urgency here and a report back timeline. The Ellis Act caused the loss of over 22,000 rent-controlled units since 2001, as you know. Currently, 100 more units are being lost each month. The at-risk housing report on today's agenda states 12,000 affordable units could be lost over the next 5 years. There's been a huge jump in tenant buyout agreements filed with HCID. Tenants are being displaced and units lost left and right. You can't stop Ellis evictions, but the city's land use powers can dissuade Ellis use. But you have to be bold and use those powers to the fullest extent. This report, sadly, is a quiet whisper when we need a roar. We need leadership, and we need you to be bold. On item number 4, that this motion is a no-brainer, really. We currently have a process which provides tenants a way to stop condo conversions and prevent their displacement. But by not providing accurate vacancy data, tenants are operating on a rigged system stacked against them. For tenants, it's like being in Vegas and playing a 5-card stud and being given 3 cards to deal with. There's no way you can win. Thus, tenants are extremely disadvantaged in accessing a system that could prevent the loss of their homes. We want to thank Councilmember Koretz for bringing forth this highly logical motion. The city should not approve any tentative subdivision tract maps on any rent-controlled buildings until the time vacancy rates data is updated to current rates so that tenants are afforded the opportunity to challenge condo conversions equipped with accurate information. We urge adoption of this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Jill Stewart. And Jill Stewart. 2 minutes.
Thank you on items 2, 3, and 4, I guess. I just want to say a couple things. The idea that you can measure the vacancy rates in LA and that at the same time we're talking about this, the DWP has wiped out the basic approach to collecting vacancy data. This leads me to a constant conclusion about why we can't get a grip on what's going on in Los Angeles and why we're so far behind on research, so far behind San Francisco. I urge you to call a few of the groups in San Francisco who are far, far ahead of Los Angeles, including the San Francisco Homeless Coalition, for some of the understanding of what data looks like. I would like to say that the reason I think the DWP is no longer creating the vacancy data, it gets back to the fact that every member of the elected officialdom in Los Angeles is taking vast amounts of money from developers. So when the DWP came up with its new programs, nobody in the elected office said, hey, are you going to make sure we keep track of the vacancy rates we're creating by all the spot zoning and all the bad planning decisions? Vacancy rates in luxury apartments mostly. So I do see a problem here with, I won't call it flat out corruption, but incompetence certainly, by not having a major group like DWP collecting vacancy data. If you did have vacancy data, however, I'm afraid you'd misuse it. Planning is saying that a one-to-one affordable housing replacement requirement is a big reform in Los Angeles. Again, San Francisco will tell you, they've already done the study, a one-to-one affordable housing unit replacement does not create no net loss, with all due respect to Matt Glesney. That's not true. For every 100 luxury units built, 40 affordable units are required to service the needs of the luxury dwellers. It's called gentrification, and it's time Los Angeles and the Los Angeles City Council and Los Angeles City Planning started talking about gentrification. Thank you.
Thank you. Shane Phillips. Shane Phillips. Shane Phillips. Pick your items. Yes. Go ahead.
I actually had comments on 2, 4, and 5. Should I just limit it to 2 and 4 right now? Okay. My name's Shane Phillips.
You'll be done at.
Sorry? Okay. All right. So I'll start with item number 2. My name's Shane Phillips. I'm with Central City Association. This is the question of withholding demolition permits until issuance of building permits. On this, we just have some concerns about unintended consequences, specifically with the potential for this to create a stock of blighted housing that sits vacant for years while projects wait to receive entitlements. And Councilmember Price raised this issue. And so we're just asking that city staff look at whether this policy could result in an increase in blighted and vacant housing, which I think we all are aware has some negative impacts on aesthetics, health, and especially safety. And to look at if there's an alternative approach that could better achieve the same goals with fewer negative potential side effects. The other item, I won't comment on 5 right now, but on item 4 regarding vacancy rates for the planning areas, we know that the rental vacancy rate in Los Angeles is at a historic low, and that that the housing shortage is at the root cause of our affordability crisis. And unfortunately, as I think has been made clear today, right now we don't have good data on vacancy rates, especially at the community plan level. And so we would encourage the city to actually take this opportunity to establish a robust vacancy measurement system as part of this motion with quarterly rather than annual updates to this data. Clearly based on the comments from DWP, that will take some work, but we think that's worthwhile. This data will go a long way toward debunking anti-housing arguments about the occupancy of newly built buildings. And it will also help the city to identify areas of greatest need in its community plan updates, among other benefits. And I can say as a avowed data nerd, we will be happy to take whatever data DWP wants to share, scrub it of individual data, and we'd be happy to look through that and figure out what our vacancy rates are and share that with whoever else can benefit from it. Thank you.
Sylvie Shane. You have 2 minutes on the items you choose.
Thank you, committee, Councilmember Cedillo. I'm going to speak about 2 and 4. Regarding 2, and I'm a policy wonk, so this is all technical stuff. We still haven't discussed right of return. That's a critical component. I mean, you're talking about no net loss, but the fact is that the people that are displaced, they don't get to come back. So that needs to be how we move forward. The other issue is that in instances where there's re-rental of an existing building, the provision requires the owner to notify the tenants within the first 2 years. From years 3 to 5, they notify housing, but nobody knows housing is not required to notify the tenants. So there needs to be some protocol there where housing then notifies the tenants. With respect to hotel conversions, boutique hotels are considered residential in land use in the municipal code. So I would argue that they should be precluded after an Ellis. Also, with regards to DWP data, right now there's a big disparity between DWP data and census data. And one of the issues that has not been described by DWP is that a lot of our existing old stock in RSO buildings have shared meters. So how are they making the determination what the vacancy rate is? How then do you account for a lower intensity of occupancy when those units are Airbnb'd and they are maybe occupied for 50% of the time and therefore using half the utilities. So I just would argue that DWP is not a good source for that data. I would also argue that because we're talking about converting RSO units, we should be looking at data on RSO specifically. Yes, on moratorium, there's economic indicators that we are on the cusp of another condo conversion crisis. Thank you.
Walt Centerfit, Mark Simon, and Thelmy Pettis, please. Item 2.
Almost done. 1 minute.
1 minute.
This is on item 2, correct? Yeah. Walt Centerfit from the LA Tenants Union and an Ellis eviction victim. I just want to say that, as Councilman Corrett said last time we talked about Ellis, whatever the initial rationale for, there's no remaining justification for the Ellis Act. We know that it is used to evict and displace RSO tenants and contribute to our housing crisis. So it's an unjust act. What do we do with an unjust act? One is we try to repeal it. I want to challenge you all. What are you doing to get the city to actively lead efforts to repeal? And number 2, we try to impede, redirect, make it difficult to use. So you should look at every one of these things. Have you done the most that we can to discourage Ellis and make it difficult to use? I don't think so. For example, if the Ellis Act allows legally for a building removed to be turned into a hotel policy, so be it. But we could also say it's against the policy of the city of LA to displace low-income tenants in order to build hotels. And so we will impede by other public policy means you're doing that as a way to discourage this abuse and loss of housing.
Hi, Mark Simon, another tenant who's been displaced by the Ellis Act. I want to follow up on what Sylvie was talking about, right of return. This is a true story. Walt was also in the building. Our landlord, as we were moving out, tenants were moving in. Within 3 months of our building being Ellis, because he was leaving the rental market, it is 12 units. There are now 10 of them fully occupied. That was 3 months after we left, which was a year and a half ago. We brought some of these issues to HCID. Some of us were told, show us the rent receipts. Our landlord who is one of the 10 worst landlords or among the 10 worst in the LA Cubed article that was recently, Jeffrey Scappa, he has at least 50 LLCs. So, and the tenants tell us we're not paying rent. And he had already put forward the idea of having people pay under the table. He actually said to Walt, I've got all these LLCs, I can have people pay under the table. Some remedy about that. Further investigation.
Hello again, Thelmy Perez with the Renters Day LA Coalition. I want to say just up front that we support the recommendations on items 1 and 4, withholding demo permits and requiring 1-for-1 replacement. Those are important. But I think I don't need to remind you all of the housing crisis and the homelessness surge that we're facing here in the city of Los Angeles, which is why this is such an important conversation to really think boldly about how to preserve RSO housing and affordable housing. With recommendations 3, Ellis Cap, 2, the condo conversions, and 6, hotel conversions, we're really disappointed with the lack of basic research and basic analysis on these. I mean, for example, the Ellis Cap, there is no analysis and there's not even a recommendation, but it does not mention how this tool is effectively used in many other major California cities. I know that you recommended the HCID and the city attorney speak and reach out to Oakland and other cities regarding the just cause eviction. Why are we not doing that for an Ellis Cap? We should be doing that. Our coalition did some basic research that we've handed to you before, and we want to hand to the planning department. It's something that they should basically just look at and compare what other cities are doing with conversions and demolitions. And I know my time has run out, so we'll follow up in writing. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine Wagner Caldera? What is your last name?
Calderero.
Calderero. Becky Dennison and Francisca De La Rosa or Francisco? Francisca?
Thank you. I'm Catherine Wagner Calderero. I'm an attorney with the Inner City Law Center. I'll restrict my comments to item 2, issue number 4, which relates to density bonus projects and replacing pre-existing affordable units on a one-to-one basis. Requiring one-to-one replacement is good, but it misses a really crucial piece of the puzzle. What happens to tenants who are in those affordable units? They're forced to move out only to have their affordable units torn down and replaced by new affordable units, which now they have no right to come back to. Since there will be the same number of new affordable units, it would make sense for tenants who were evicted to have a right of priority, a right of first refusal to come back to the same building. Many of the tenants have been living there for 10 or 20 years. It is their home. Also, there's no provision being made for what happens to them in the meantime. Other cities like San Francisco provide a program where people evicted from affordable housing units for this kind of thing are given other priority for other affordable housing. Los Angeles could do the same thing, and San Francisco would provide a good model.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Becky Dennison with Venice Community Housing. I want to really support the recommendation to prevent any demolition permits until entitlements are approved and permits are issued. It would absolutely stop much of what the issue that Councilmember Koretz just raised about people going right back into the rental market after Ellising their units. And I'm not sure why the Housing Department said that's allowed. That is absolutely not allowed under the Ellis Act. You have to remove yourself from the rental market. That's the Housing Department's remedy when that happens, when somebody lies or misleads or changes their mind. The only remedy is to put RSO back on the property, but it's not allowed. And if we didn't issue the demo permits until we were entirely sure what was happening, then that would stop much of that abuse. I also just want to urge, there's lack of recommendation around using your land use authority, which is the main tool for limiting the impact of Ellis. An annual cap on demolitions is obviously allowable. There's absolutely no analysis or recommendation there. The same with conversion to hotels. The report says that the Ellis Act allows conversions to hotels. It absolutely does not. You hold the land use authority for what happens after Ellis. Thank you.
My name is Francesca Della Rosa with Works and the Renters Day Coalition. When we learned that our city's homelessness rate increased nearly 20% from the previous year, it should have been a clear reminder to us all that we have no choice but to implement every tool and strategy to keep people in their homes. That is why, as others have said, we cannot understand or accept why there was no recommendation or real analysis provided to this committee for an annual cap on demolitions. We are not satisfied and hope you are not satisfied with the mere 5 sentences offered under this item. And we hope that you don't believe that your hands are tied. The analysis should have included a look at other regulation models that have been implemented, details on how other cities across the state have exercised their authority to curb demolitions, how a cap in combination with holding the issuance of demolition permits and adopting one-for-one housing replacement provisions is a necessary preservation tool at this very time as Ellis evictions are only escalating with no signs of slowing down. Most importantly, this section simply ignores what RSO housing does, which keeps people housed, and that's what we must do. So we strongly urge you to instruct the department to come back with a real recommendation for an annual cap on demolitions.
Amy Williams, Alex Flores, and Lorraine Lopez.
Good afternoon, council members. I'm a tenant attorney and I'm up to my eyeballs in Ellis evictions. I'm speaking today about recommendation 1 in the planning report with respect to the approval of demolition permits tied to planning approvals. It's not implicit in this recommendation that will prevent the displacement of tenants via the Ellis Act. As was mentioned by the person from Venice Community, the planning approvals or the approval of the Ellis Act evictions need to be tied to the approval of the planning approvals. Of the planning permits. This also echoes what Shane Phillips mentioned about preventing blighted, unoccupied properties while developers wait for planning permits to be approved. I would also comment that I believe the recommendation number 3 on the annual cap for demolition permits was a lazy analysis because affordable units do not equate to RSO units, and I would echo the comments by Ms. Ortega about the either-or provisions for new buildings that would be subject to RSO constructed on former RSO Ellis properties. A cap would provide that new properties could be subject to the RSO. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Alex Flores. I'm a staff attorney with the Inner City Law Center. I work on the homelessness prevention team. What that means is that I'm one of a handful of attorneys that get Shriver funding to defend the poorest among our tenants in eviction cases. The thing that worries me about the Ellis Act is that it continues to be a tool to get around rent control. I know that the city attorney's office says that there's a UD defense, an unlawful detainer defense, written in the code. It's simply not true. I have argued that before many judges all around the county. Their belief is that it's not clear that just because they have not followed everything in the law, so that is in any way an affirmative defense. The issue is that I have personally dealt with a lot of clients who, when the landlords fail to evict them, they simply say, I'm going to Ellis it. And because what currently is required is for them to file a statement saying, I'm going to Ellis it, that's all that the eviction requires. There's no follow-up to see whether these apartments are actually rented the next month or the next year. What that means is that when we look at the Ellis Act, there has to be protections for tenants so that if an eviction does go forward based on an Ellis Act, then that means that all requirements, plans, permits, all of that must have been filed, reviewed, approved before an eviction can go forward. And there also needs to be a way for tenants in these buildings to have a say before the Ellis actual process goes through. This is a basic due process issue which is completely missing out of the Ellis. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Lorraine Lopez. I am a supervising attorney at Inner City Law Center. I've been working there for 7 years. And in those 7 years, I want to echo the frustration that has been voiced not only by the tenants in this room, but also by the advocates in this room. Our frustration is that this report leaves a lot of the enforcement to HCID. HCID has no teeth. There is no enforcement. There is no internal oversight of paperwork. Landlords can file sloppy paperwork, and that is enough, again, as Alex Flores has just mentioned, in a court of law to evict a tenant. That is all they need. We have dealt with applications that have been backdated. We have dealt with applications where no notice was ever actually given to the tenants. You're placing the burden on the private sector, on tenants, on their advocates to do the enforcement and to do the oversight for HCID, and that's inappropriate. We should not be doing their job. We have dealt with city attorneys who are uncooperative with us, who blame our clients for any delay in the process. We deal with uncooperative inspectors, uncooperative investigators. If you're going to force this to be the enforcement mechanism, then we need cooperation from the department for the department to do its job.
Thank you. Jennifer Ganata, Susan Hunter, and Jill Stewart. Yeah. I'm sorry, Jill, you.
You already had 2 minutes.
Hello, Jennifer.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Ganata, and I'm also a staff attorney at Inner City Law Center, but I focus on land use issues. I'm in favor of having controls on Ellis Act, but we are at a crucial point in this city's housing crisis. And while this council looks towards building more units, we must ensure that the preservation of the city's RSO's housing stock is in place. Our current RSO housing stock is affordable for many tenants and does not require further subsidies. The city's plan to grow assumes that we are not constantly losing this stock. And if we look in terms of the data that we have, CES has provided data that shows that between 2001 to 2016, there has been over 21,200 units that have been taken out because of Ellis. Currently, landlords are using the Ellis evictions to get around RSO, and what we need to do now is make sure that there are further protections. Thank you.
Susan Hunter.
Yes, actually, can I amend my speaker card to speak on 2 and 4 and have an additional minute? Would that be possible? No. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. My name is Susan Hunter. I'm with the Coalition to Preserve Los Angeles, as well as the Los Angeles Tenants Union Hollywood Local. And I want to say that for once, I actually agree with Matthew Glesney that it is not okay to create policy without correct data. It is wholly irresponsible. This committee has no other option but to secure the budget and to create a task force to actually do a hard count audit on our vacancy rate in the city. Otherwise, you are continuing to do policy creation by throwing a dart in the dark and hoping that it lands somewhere. Right now, we're looking at the fact that in January, we were hearing that our vacancy rating was 2.3% because there were groups that wanted to defeat Measure S, and now all of a sudden it's 6%, so we can allow hotel and condo conversions. You didn't build 100,000 units for $600 a month in 6 months. We have to get a real number. We have to get a real hard count. We need to know who's actually extending leases, who's signing the leases. We want to know who the real property owners are. We want to know if the person that's on the lease is a year-round resident, or are they somebody who's only here on vacation. We've seen leases that have actually been extended to Airbnb and Sunstay and other home-sharing organizations. So if somebody's in that unit, it's just not one of us. So this committee has no other options but to do the right thing by the taxpayers and the residents of the city, form a task force, go knock door to door, and find out what's really going on. Thank you.
Laura Raymond.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Laura Raymond. I'm with ACT LA. We're a citywide coalition fighting for affordable homes and good local jobs in the city of Los Angeles. Since 2001, LA has had 22,000 Ellis Act evictions. So we're hemorrhaging apartments that working people depend on to stay in LA. This is causing an outmigration of working people in the city and in some cases leading to homelessness. We urge the Housing Committee to adopt an annual cap of demolitions of RSO units. As my colleagues have mentioned, other cities have models that we can look to for this. We also support limiting loss of RSO through regulation of the home sharing industry to preserve affordable homes and also good jobs. We support the motion to limit condo conversions in planning areas where vacancy data has not been updated in the last 12 months. And lastly, we support the expansion of no net loss, which requires one-for-one replacement of affordable units, and we urge movement on a right of first refusal policy for replacement units. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues? Number 2 is what? I got that. Oh, we're not satisfied to go forward yet. is this number 2? All right. Okay, so for item number 2, we're going to ask for a report coming back from planning back to the committee to deal with the concerns that were raised today. The issues that were raised today should be addressed. We recognize the consequences of the where there are violations of the Alice Act, and we want to prevent those abuses from continuing, and so we need a report back on that. So that's one. Number 2 is a recommendation to instruct both planning and DWP to report back on how we can get an accurate count. That's not helpful. I understood what was said, but it's inadequate for us not to have an accurate count, and it's difficult for us to move forward without it, and there's no reason why the burden should be shifted to tenants in the absence of an accurate account. So we need a plan. I'm agnostic about who does the count. I'm just know that we need to have some accurate account that we can have a baseline for which we all agree on, and so we need a report from planning and DWP about how we get this accurate account. Number 2, we need to make the modest amendments as they were referred to of changing the right of first refusal, easy for everyone to say, from 5 years to 10 years. We need the specificity and the clarity to provide for tenants an affirmative defense for landlords' non-compliance with ALICE requirements to RSO ALICE provisions of the code. And finally, we need planning and HCID in consultation with the CA to report back in 6 days with recommendations to delete or modify waiver of relocation assistance provisions. Is that right? Okay. And we're moving the planning report as amended. That's number 2. So can we, without objection? Sir? Okay. Number 3. Okay. All right, so we'll do receive and file on item number 3. And item number 4 is... Right, consistent with number 2, a report back. And we will keep this in committee for the next 60 days. Okay. Thank you. All right, thank you, everybody. 5-minute break.
Association for City of San Jose.
Can I go to item 5 first? 'Cause we're gonna
Sure.
score 'em.
Yeah. Item.
Excuse me, I want to apologize to the CA. I am anxiously awaiting your report, but we also have a vote to take, and I don't want to lose quorum, and we are time definite, so I'd like to go to item 5, which requires us to have a quorum and a vote.
Yeah. Item 5. Motion. City of Harris Dawson instructing HCID in consultation with the city attorney to report relative to the feasibility of prohibiting landlords from terminating tenancies in rental units not subject to the RSO, unless for just cause.
Okay. Housing.
Well, briefly, what I can say about the just cause provisions is that currently the rent stabilization ordinance has 14 legal reasons for eviction. Some of them are due to tenant fault, and several of them are tenant no fault, such as the Ellis that we just discussed. This motion would expand the just cause protections to non-RSO properties.
Okay. We're also asking that you deal with, communicate with cities in the Bay Area for part of your report back, and I'd like you guys to report back within 60 days. Does that work?
Yes, sir.
Can you do 30?
If you would like us to, we can do 30.
It's going to be a recess.
We'll be in recess, so how about 45? 60 days.
So noted.
Thank you. We get a... Okay, so I've got a ton of public comment cards. We can either move this item and wait for the report back, or we can have a conversation and lose quorum and not move the item.
Just move it.
Is this fine with everybody? Consensus? No? Okay, well then come and be heard. You might lose your quorum and you'll be heard and with no effect, but that's your option. Okay? So, look, you can raise your hand when I call your name if to acknowledge your presence, or you can come up and make a comment. Those are your choices. Doreen Alexander. Yeah, go ahead. Come on up. Carlos Calderon.
They're out in the hall.
And Mark Panetta.
Go ahead.
My name is Doreen Alexander, and when I woke up this morning, I thought we were in a country that business people and landlords could make a profit and prosper. I understand that there's a lot of horror stories out there, and I understand your position and how difficult it is. But putting every new building under rent control is not the answer. Everything gets raised. You guys tie our hands. I can't even get a competitive bid on trash anymore because the city has decided who will be my trash person. Mm-hmm. So there's no competitiveness. Keeping up a property is expensive. Are any of you, the board here, going to come out and tell me, hey, Doreen, heard you're short on your gas bill this month. Let me help you. You have to be fair. I understand there's a lot of bad landlords out there, but I'm not one of them. Thank you.
Sir?
Yes, thank you.
For the record.
Members. Mark Panetta. We own and manage a small building, and we're against this motion. The reason being, all it takes is one really bad tenant that could bring down a building, really disturb the building and the peace and tranquility of the neighbors. Some examples of reasons you'd want to move a tenant out: hoarding, causing a nuisance, feuding with other tenants, threatening and violent behavior against other tenants or the landlord, pervasive pest problems. These are all reasons you want to give a 30, 60-day notice and maintain a safe, tranquil property. And that's really our role as property managers, as housing providers. So I recommend not expanding this just cause to other buildings built after the RSO period.
And you don't think that those things would be just cause? The things you just articulated?
Yeah. The reason,
please, because
it would require getting witnesses. It's very difficult to evict today when you have to have witnesses and other tenants show up in court that might be subject to retaliation. Nobody's going to want to do
that. I just don't understand why we have one standard for people who are in RSO and not for in other entities. It's why it just seems like there's a dual system here, and it seems that we got to have a baseline for people's conduct and responsibility who are tenants, and that there ought to be a standard of review and for them to continue their tenancy or not. I'm just not getting why we're going to have a two-tiered, why we've evolved a two-tiered system simply because a tenant is poor, they have a higher review standard than a tenant that's poor. I don't get that from any perspective, either from the tenant or the landlord.
Under RSO, you can't give a 60-day notice to vacate.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I think you called me
Carlos.
Carlos, yes. I just want to basically say that I'm talking about item number 5, I believe. As a property manager, I see the need of enforcing, fair housing and all that in all areas. But the number one reason why people get evicted is, if I am correct, is for non-payment of rent, not necessarily for the other 13 reasons listed on in the ordinance. And I just see that that is one item that I think is important to bring in. But I've been in this business a long time, and I see the need of more housing, which is the solution.
Yes.
Not, because if we focus on other things, I think what we have to focus in, it is in the development of more housing. So in the next 20, 30 years, we wouldn't be talking about this much. Basically, that's all I wanted to say.
Acuerdo.
Thank you.
Okay. Jay Martin. Jay Martin, Fred Sutton, and Olivia Lee. Jay Martin, is that you? Please come in. Haven't seen you in a long time.
For a while. I've been busy fighting for my house, which I've recently lost. So I actually wanted to speak about something really brief that's kind of not addressed here, which is the demolition of RSOs before that are under investigation or that are not able to be properly investigated. And so what we're seeing is, I know there was a motion put forth through the Housing Committee, and I don't know what's going, where it's at now. But what we're seeing is that a lot of RSOs, as you heard today, are being put back onto the market, and we're not properly able to enforce. And what I'm finding with an HCID is that they actually don't have the teeth to enforce. I'm not quite sure why. There's a lot of weirdness around it, but even with transaction receipts on Airbnb, it's very difficult to get them unless you subpoena them, and if you have to file a litigation to subpoena them. The UDs move really quickly. It's very difficult to get those, and even when you do, it's hard to get them into the hands of housing. So what we're seeing is that these buildings are being put through to re-rental. Sorry, guys, really quick. They're being re-rented on Airbnb. They're being re-rented under lease agreements, family occupied, and we're not able to address it on a large scale. So the buildings are torn down, rights of return are never given, people aren't allowed back into their units, and then we're losing the RSO stock like that. So we have no ability to address this widespread abuse by multiple developers. So I'm just seeing what can be done at this level in council to address the fact that these buildings are going down faster than we can keep them up.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yes.
Hello, council members. My name is Fred Sutton. I'm here with the Apartment Association of Greater Los Angeles. Thank you very much for your time. Many of our members currently operate under just cause in the RSO, and I'm here to urge the committee to review the nuances in the just cause ordinance, as there have been major issues that block an owner's ability to operate a building for the benefit of all in the community. On the surface, just cause sounds reasonable, but in practice, there are elements that are very hard to prove, particularly as it relates to a nuisance. Whether it is an individual that causes a disturbance to the community through noise, aggressive behavior, refuses to follow building rules, or actually causes damage to the building itself, tenant witnesses are needed in court for testimony, and this is often not realistic for a variety of reasons, but particularly if there is a criminal element in the building. People do not come forward and do not want to be put in that position to confront a neighbor, and in practicality, the housing provider has a very, very difficult time to prove the existence of the nuisance. Already in the current system, it can take up to 6 months to enforce an unlawful detainer for non-payment of rent, which is the most easy to prove. Just cause is becoming increasingly unjust, as a recent LA Times article highlighted last year. Expanding just cause will exacerbate the already logjammed court system, which is fraught with frivolous delays.
Thank you.
And I'd urge the body to look at the current process and some of the issues. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Olivia Lee, and I'm with the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber believes that our housing homelessness crisis is the greatest issue facing California right now. That's why we work so hard to pass measures H and HHH and to defeat S. But addressing these issues is incredibly complex, and we believe the proposals before you could have the unintended consequence of making a situation worse for tenants. Just cause eviction ordinances usually include tedious requirements beyond merely demanding the landlord to have cause to terminate the tenancy. These simplified explanations of just cause evictions requirement fail to account that for cause evictions are substantially more difficult and expensive to complete. Just cause is problematic to the community as it takes away an owner's ability to evict tenants who cause issues such as nuisance and criminal activity in a timely manner. This is also to the detriment of other tenants suffering the bad behavior of their neighbors. California is also already on the forefront of providing tenant protections in the country, including eviction protection. So we look forward to working with you, your staff, and the community to address this issue. Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Linda T. Hollandid. Linda. Beverly Kenworthy. And Horace Height. Horace? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Linda Hollenbeck. I'm an attorney that represents landlords, managers, owners in the city of Los Angeles. First of all, I'd like to just make a comment. An RSO tenant does not mean they are poor. It is not a poor tenant. It is a tenant who lives in the city of Los Angeles who is lucky enough to have under-market rents. So that's a big difference. It's shameful almost to think that every single tenant that lives in the city of LA that is under RSO is poor. That's simply not the case. They simply have a lower rent than market rate for the most part.
Not all.
And they're very lucky for that.
Yes.
On the other hand, there is no such thing as a no-cause eviction. A 30-day notice or a 60-day notice currently being served that doesn't have to have cause in the notice does not mean there is no cause. There's always going to be a cause. And as the other people who just mentioned, the cause is usually nuisance, disruption to the community. It's the other tenants that my clients are trying to protect when they serve that 30 or 60-day notice. They are trying to serve a notice where we don't have to list witness names, which is a requirement under the RSO, under a nuisance eviction. We don't have to list the witness names, other tenants' names, putting them at risk. We're trying to protect them. If we don't list those names, we can't use them in court. So we're not able to then remove a tenant causing problems in the property without putting other tenants at risk.
Yeah, I have a question because you're the fourth person to get up and say this.
Yeah.
So my understanding is that eviction is a remedy for non-payment of rent, nuisances, and other things. You're the fourth person to talk about crime. Correct. I'm just curious. It seems to me the remedy to crime is to call the police.
You would think that. One would think that. Unfortunately, that simply doesn't help. Now, here's the problem. Let's say you have a crime at the property. The police are not a witness to that crime. The police just took a report from a witness. The police report is not admissible in court. It's a hearsay document. I need the person who actually saw one neighbor punch another neighbor. I need the person who saw somebody break into the car.
So you're saying to me if someone is charged with a crime, that's not admissible in court?
The fact that they're charged might be admissible, but a charge is not a conviction. The police, I use the police when I have a drug crime.
I understand the
but not
difference.
for
I'm genuinely trying to be.
Yeah. No, that we need the witnesses.
Have clarity because I've managed properties before, and when if someone was charged with a crime, getting them out was not challenging.
It is challenging. Now it's not. It's good evidence. It's nice evidence to be able to say they were charged with the crime, but I still need the witnesses who saw what they did, because I don't need a conviction to be able to evict somebody for bad behavior. The behavior has to be disruptive to the community, and I need to prove that it was disruptive to the community, and a charge by itself doesn't mean that. So the police are used and called in when we have drug activity, because they're going to come in and say, I've been a police officer for 20 years, I saw these drugs, we tested them, I know what cocaine is, I know what this is. When it's just drug dealing at the property, bothersome behavior, coming and going all hours of the day and night, honking, traffic, noise, I need other tenants to come in and testify that their life, the quality of their life, their quiet enjoyment was disrupted. The police can't do that. Their comments are
Thank you.
hearsay.
Thank you. Next.
Beverly Kenworthy with the California Apartment Association. I echo the comments you've heard. There are a number of problems with just cause. Just because you can't serve a 30 or 60-day notice is not going to mean you're not going to evict somebody. You will have to go through the process of a 3-day notice. A 3-day notice to vacate your apartment is almost no time to leave. You have a 3-day notice and you can't leave, you get an unlawful retainer against you. You try and re-rent after that's happened, it's very difficult because you're a quantified risk. You've known to have caused a nuisance that could be that you could go to court for. So, and also speaking as a tenant, I have been in a situation where we moved into a building and we had some tenants who were horrible. And they were being constant complaints, constant security calls. The manager was trying to document all of that. That you can't just evict somebody on a whim. It took forever, and finally what happened is that their lease was up and they chose not to renew their lease. They moved out and our entire community changed back to a quiet place that I can call home.
Thank you. Sir.
Yes, good afternoon. It's an honor for me to be here.
Your name for the record.
My name is Horace Height, and I'm a housing provider. I look at my tenants as part of my family. I care about them. I watch over them. And I've worked in this business since 1981. I oppose the Just Cause Act, mainly because it's going to discourage construction. All I've heard here today is that we have a housing shortage. And all you're talking about is converting condos to apartments. I'm talking about adding apartments. We have about 1 million apartment house shortage or housing unit shortage in the state of California. I would like to encourage the development of more low and moderate income housing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Horace. Kay Butterfield. Robert Grant, and Mark Simon.
Hello, I'm Kay Butterfield, and I work at Horace Height Estates, and we do provide fair housing for everyone, but we're trying to build 21 more units, and we get roadblocks constantly from this committee, that committee. It's finally beginning to come together, but you'd think if we have such a housing shortage, you people would get with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Hello, my name is Robert Grant. As a representative and owner here in the greater Los Angeles area, I'm highly concerned about the current recommendation to expand Just Cause to all non-RSO units as proposed. We manage 62 communities throughout the greater Los Angeles area and represent 14,000 apartments. The true nature of my role and that of my team is managing over 300 dedicated employees and 30,000 plus residents that call our communities home. As you can appreciate, we're in the business of providing housing. It is in our financial interest to have our apartments occupied. Evicting or non-renewing a resident is a last-ditch effort that we have to take when that relationship is no longer amicable. As an owner and manager, we are already challenged with the lengthy and costly steps to evict non-paying residents. There are already ample laws that protect residents in eviction matters. Good owners and operators need to be protected so that good owners and operators remain in the market. I speak for my team and my residents when I say I strongly oppose the current recommendation to expand this.
Thank you. Sir?
Hi, Mark Simon. I'm just speaking on behalf of the tenants. I mean, I witnessed a whole building of tenants at Crenshaw. We helped them as part of the LA Tenants Union at Crenshaw and Venice. And these people, the whole building was being evicted. I mean, this was a building of about 50 units, and it had nothing to do with just cause. You know, they were just being evicted. And because the building had been built after 78, they weren't even getting any relocation fees. And these were people who had lived there. It was a community of nurses and teachers and home workers, and they were just being evicted and weren't getting anything. And it had nothing to do with, none of them were being evicted because of just cause. It was, they were just being, the building was being shut down. I believe it was being Ellis, but they had no recompense to anything. And that just has to stop.
Thank you. Walt Centerfield and Thelmy Perez.
Yeah, at one level, we certainly endorse this. And at one level, what the chairman said is absolutely correct. It's a matter of simple equity. Why should people that are not covered under RSO have fewer basic civil rights protections? That building at Crenshaw and Venice that my colleague was talking about was primarily black. And the landlords wanted to replace them because some of them were Section 8, and some of them had other reasons, but they wanted to replace them with white, more upscale tenants. So it was a simple thing. And because of no just cause, they had fewer things with which to fight. There were absolutely no just causes behind those evictions. So obviously we need to go far beyond this. We need to repeal Costa-Hawkins so that then we can talk about how we can extend rent control, because there's a whole market of people out there, we've done research on it, who are marketing buildings that are not covered by rent control because it is easier to evict the tenants, replace them with a demographic they like more, and make more money. We got to stop that.
Angel, please. Angel, and then Michael Millman. Okay. Michael, Angel. Angel? No, I called you.
How much time do I have?
1 minute.
1 minute. Okay. Hi, my name's Angel. I live in Canoga Park in the San Fernando Valley, and I am in support of item 5 because a lot of people in my community of color, are targeted, and a lot of individuals who we've come in contact with on our block and in the local community have been evicted, and who otherwise would not have been evicted if it was, if we had something like this. The thing also that I see here is a lot of people are spinning this. It's really disgusting that the housing crisis and homelessness emergency is happening, and these individuals are complicit. Are basically part of this because they would not allow. They're against item number 5. I am in support of it, and our local college is organizing in the San Fernando Valley, and this is the reason why a lot of people are up in arms. It's because there's so much. Oh, there's 5 seconds. Yeah, I'm in support of item number 5, and hopefully, y'all could be, with the community, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, good afternoon.
Michael Millman.
Good afternoon, Michael Millman, M-I-L-L-M-A-N. The chair asked a terrific, outstanding question. I thought I was back in law school. He says, why don't you tell me, Mr. Millman, the difference between the evidentiary or burden of proof between just cause people who are under the RSO or those people under the Costa-Hawkins, which are exempt? And he deserves an answer, and the answer is simple: incentive. No developer's going to come back into LA in certain districts and build anything, and you can ask Jan Perry, build anything unless if it falls under the rent control. That's the difference, okay? Now, they tried Just Cause in Santa Monica. It didn't amount to any less or more evictions whatsoever, because you can serve a 60-day notice to increase the rent. If they don't pay it, then you just move ahead. It's a waste of time. It's a nice try, but it's not going to work, and I'm a friend of this committee. It's not going to work. Please get rid of it.
I've heard that from people who don't share your point of view. But I think we're going to move it regardless. We're good with it. And we'll move forward and see how we do. Report back in 60 days. Motion, any objection? So be the order.
Mr. Chair,
now, go ahead.
Item 6.
No, can we go back to 1? Oh. He has waited so patiently.
Item 1, City Attorney Report, San Jose versus California Building Industry Association.
Thank you so much. My apologies. You've waited patiently, and we thank you.
No, thank you. I understand. Adrienne Corsani, City Attorney's Office. This report was one that we filed in 2015 to give the council some background and some information on the impact of the case that was decided by the California Supreme Court, CBIA versus City of San Jose. In that case, San Jose enacted a citywide inclusionary housing ordinance that requires new residential for sale development projects to set aside 15% of those units for affordable housing. And the ordinance included several alternative compliance options, including construction of off-site affordable units, payment of an in-lieu fee, dedication of land, or the acquisition and rehabilitation of a comparable number of affordable units. They also had an incentivization structure, making projects eligible for density bonus, reduced parking requirements, minimum setback, etc. The court upheld as a permissible land use regulation this ordinance under the city's police power. The city has the authority to regulate in the interest of public health, safety, and welfare, and the court looked at whether the regulations furthered a legitimate public interest. And the court said that price controls are a constitutional means to achieve a legitimate public purpose in addressing the impacts of not having an inclusionary housing requirement, only providing market rate housing. Development of market rate housing occupies land available for any type of other housing while simultaneously driving up the price of remaining land, and increasing market rate housing drives up the demand for services without creating affordable housing for the employees needed to carry out those services. So in looking at the court's decision, we tried to give the council some options in terms of what this means for the city of Los Angeles. The first one is probably the most straightforward. The city can impose affordable housing requirements on residential for sale developments through its own inclusionary housing ordinance, which would be modeled after San Jose's. They prevailed in the court. We would look to theirs as the standard and mimic what they had done in terms of the background analysis and the provisions that we could
Single
include.
unit or multi-unit?
Multi-unit. For multi-unit housing. It's for sale only, not for rental.
I got that.
Yeah. And so,
No, but is it single family, single lot, or is this?
it's condos as well. If it's a for sale unit, it would be covered by the inclusionary housing requirement. But that takes us to the second item that we discussed in the report, which is we can impose developmental impact fees on rental units, but we're still limited by the court's decision in the Palmer case, Palmer versus City of Los Angeles, where Costa-Hawkins doesn't allow us to impose an inclusionary housing requirement on rental properties. So the third note that we make in our report is that the city could continue to encourage Sacramento to look at that again and overturn that by changing the law.
Good afternoon. My name is Claudia Monterrosa, and I'm from the Housing and Community Investment Department. And I will report on the state of the current legislation at the state level. It's AB 1505. I'm happy to report that it has passed its House of Origin, so now it's in the Senate, and it did pass its committee on June 6th.
The authors are?
The authors are Bloom from Santa Monica. There's two other authors that I don't have in front of me right now, but it is moving forward. So we're hopeful that that's going to be adopted by the full Senate in the next coming weeks, and that we're hopeful that right, and that we're hopeful that it's going to be sent to the governor. Now, there's been a lot of advocacy around this issue, and the city does have a support position on this, and it's been actually a support position of the city for the last several years, in fact, since 2010. And so we have been actively pursuing this as an option so that we can have the administrative authority to engage in an analysis of doing either a multifamily or single-family inclusionary zoning ordinance. In terms of the impact fee, we are currently evaluating that through the linkage fee. So that's one of the options that is presented through the city attorney report. So the city, as you're well aware, is considering that right now as we speak. The one thing that we had originally thought about reporting back earlier is that if we were to engage or direct it to basically explore a for sale inclusionary zoning, that we would do so with a multifamily component as well, so that if we're going to engage in that, that we should look at that. And in the case that the state overturns either Costa-Hawkins or 1505 actually passes, that we will be ready to enact or at least explore the options for inclusionary zoning for both for sale and for multifamily rental housing units.
Are you suggesting we go forward with that with respect to the multifamily rental?
We could explore. The city has reviewed this actual very same issue on 2 occasions. The last time was, I think, in 2004 or prior to that. That was full steam ahead. This was before the Palmer decision. So we would take a look at the prior studies, but we would have to engage in a study to figure out what an inclusionary zoning component would look like. We also did in 2009 or 10, the city, together with the housing department, the planning department, and a host of community and stakeholders came together through an advisory committee working with the council to explore inclusionary zoning policies. But then that's when the Palmer decision came down, and that work and that momentum was put on hold.
It's worth noting that San Jose actually includes a provision in their ordinance that says if and when Palmer is overturned, then the regulations would apply to rental.
Will that happen for us automatically, or do we need to ask you to do that?
We could phrase the regulation similarly to San Jose. The most important thing would be the analysis that supports it. So it is advisable to do the analysis and be ready to be able to enact that.
Okay, so we will receive and file that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, item 6.
Item 6, yes.
Item 6, HCID report, CA report relative to the status of the systematic code enforcement program.
Skip. Okay.
Daniel Gomez, Housing Department. What you have before you is a request to set aside $7.5 million in an emergency reserve fund within the Systematic Code Enforcement Trust Fund. The source of that money would be from a unallocated amount of money within the trust fund in the amount of $34.5 million. And that money, the remaining balance, would be used to offset the current cost of operating the SCEP code enforcement program. And we would do so, burn off that money over until about 2020, at which time a code enforcement fee would be considered to be raised.
Okay. Anyone else?
Our office, Nick Campbell, CAO's office, our office concurs with the recommendations of the department. We just wanted to add that they do an annual fee analysis, and if there is some time before 2020 when the fee may be needed or after, they would come to this council.
Okay. Ready to move the CAO report? So moved. Any objections? No objections. No objections. Thank you guys very much.
Mr. Chair, takes us to item number 7, HCID and CAO report relative to the city's homeownership assistance programs.
Nick Campbell, CAO's office. I'm here with the staff from the Housing Department. The item before you is a request to reopen the Moderate Income Purchase Assistance Program, as well as to expand the Low Income Purchase Assistance Program, as well as the Moderate Income Purchase Assistance Programs, utilizing an MOU with the neighborhood housing services of the county of Los Angeles, whereby the city funds would be used for the first portion of those purchase assistance, up to a maximum of $90,000 for the low income program, and up to $75,000 for the moderate income program. The Housing Department is proposing to use $3 million worth of foreclosure registry penalty fees to do this, and this would be done on a one-time basis. And the department stated that they will come back in the future if funds are available and it could be effectively used by the moderate income program. I'm available for any questions, and just to note, our office agrees with the recommendations of the department.
Good afternoon, Helmi Hisarick, Housing Department, Housing and Community Investment Department. I know it's been a really long meeting. So I'll briefly push through a few pieces of information I think will be helpful for the council. This is both a report back on homeownership as well as a recommendation for 2 new programs. The program of homeownership has been operated in the city of Los Angeles for over 20 years. The manager of the program is Gloria Torres, who's my colleague with me today. Under her leadership, the program has been exceptionally well run and has served more than 600 low-income families in new homes. That is over a 10-year period. The last 10 years. In fact, during the last 5 years, the city's loaned $18.2 million to 327 low-income families and $22 million to 302 moderate-income families. The majority of the low-income purchase assistance program has been in council districts 8, 7, 15, and 6, although it is spread citywide. In the past 10 years, the moderate income purchase assistance was primarily in the years 2005 to 2008. We have not had it recently, but that program has been primarily, folks have been purchasing homes in council's districts 15, 14, 3, 7, and 8. Again, it's all citywide. Every council district has purchased. Those are where you see some of the higher numbers. We currently operate 2 programs in the homeownership program. The first is a low-income purchase assistance program, which provides $60,000 of mortgage assistance and down payment assistance to low-income households that are earning at or below 80% of the area median income. That means a family of 4 earning about $69,000 a year. And that is primarily funded with federal funds, CDBG, and HOME, which restricts us from assisting moderate-income homebuyers. We must only assist low-income homebuyers. We also have a mortgage credit certificate program, which assists households earning up to $140,000. 140% of the area median income. It's a much smaller program, but it does provide some relief on mortgage. The programs have changed over the years due to changing market conditions. We are currently facing dramatic increases in the cost of housing in Los Angeles. So homeownership rates in Los Angeles are 35.9%. So it's a very low compared to the nationwide average, which is about 63% homeownership. Home prices have increased 8.6% in the last year. They're predicted to go another 1.3% in the coming year. And the median home value in Los Angeles is $616,000. So what that means for the low-income purchase assistance program is that homes are mostly out of reach for low-income families. Many neighborhoods of Los Angeles are out of reach for low-income families. And because the federal assistance limits the program to low-income families, we are unable to serve moderate-income families earning 150% of the AMI, which equals about a family of four earning about $130,000 a year. So the goal of our homeownership program and what is in our recommendation is to increase the borrowing capacity of low-income households and to increase eligibility for homeownership programs to moderate-income households up to 150% of AMI. And our recommendations to achieve this are, first of all, to enter into a partnership with LA Neighborhood Housing Services, and its executive director, Laura Gay, is here, to create an assistance program for low and moderate households by partnering together on lending. Our second recommendation is to authorize HCID to increase low-income purchase assistance for low-income homeowners from $60,000 to $90,000. We have had this authority in the past, but now it's in partnership with LANHS. We're seeking new authorization. And finally, because in order to do a moderate income program, we need non-federal funds, we're requesting the use of $3 million in foreclosure penalty fees to reopen the moderate income purchase assistance for households earning 150% of the median. And with these recommendations, we believe we can serve 60 to 80 low-income buyers and an additional 40 to 50 moderate income buyers. Ask Gloria if she wants to add any.
My name is Gloria Torres, homeownership unit with HCID. So I just want to reiterate what Helmi said. So our recommendations would be to augment the low-income purchase assistance program, to authorize the housing department to enter into an MOU with NHS so that we could leverage funds. The total assistance amount for the low-income families would be up to $90,000. We received that authority back in 2005, so the authority is in place. And on the moderate income side, we obtained authority for that program also in 2005. We did over 300 loans. Like Helmi said, we funded about $22 million. So we are requesting to reopen that program to assist approximately 45 to 50 families. Both of these programs are very popular. They're citywide, and they're available through a network of lenders, realtors, homebuyer educators. So for example, on the moderate income side, this program was very popular, and it assisted teachers, medical personnel, entry-level law enforcement, accountants, social workers, mail carriers. On the low-income side, our borrowers are truck drivers, clerical administrative staff, maintenance workers, cashiers, customer service, and machinists, mechanics. So our programs assist a wide variety of workers in the city.
Colleagues? Oh, we have speaker cards.
We have some cards. I'll be my remarks brief. So
we want to know where these people live.
So we can live.
Can you tell us?
Yes. So, believe it or not, low-income families do find homes. As Helmi mentioned, on one of our attachments, we break down the activity for the last 5 years. So we have funded 327 transactions. They primarily purchase in council districts 8, 7, 15, 6, and 9 in that order. So I have about 18 transactions in escrow presently. Just in June, we received 6 on the low-income side. So that's where they're buying. They're buying in South Los Angeles in the affordable areas of the San Fernando Valley. On the moderate income side, for example, they purchased, this was back in 2005, 2008, Council District 15, 14, 3, 7, and 6 and 8 were tied for 5th place. So on the moderate income side, funds spread out more, or home buyers are able to afford homes more, not evenly, but they can find areas more easily throughout the city. Okay? So,
Mr. Price.
No, I'm supposed to say how excited I am about this program. I think it's very important. We're talking about improving the quality of life. That goes back to home ownership whenever possible. And so I'm pleased to see that we're rejiggering this program. Excited to see the involvement of NHS. Got a long history, track record of providing services, and certainly knows how to leverage limited resources, and I see Lori's with us, and probably other members of the NHS team. But for example, on the LIPA program, so the city would commit up to 60,000, and NHS would commit, was it 15,000, 20,000?
On the LIPA
On the
program, the low
LIPA
income
program?
is 60,000 from
and what's-
HCID and 30,000 from NHS for a total of 90,000.
That's the max on that
That's
program.
correct.
Okay, and then on the moderate, the MIPA program is 50 from the city,
Okay,
and
so
then how much from the?
I'm sorry, yes. For the moderate income program, there are two categories. So moderate 120, which is 81% of AMI to 120% of AMI, so that's a total of 75,000. Housing would contribute 60,000, and NHS would contribute 15,000, for a total of 75. Then the next bracket is from 121% of AMI to 150. Total assistance amount is 50,000. HCID would contribute 35,000, and NHS 15,000.
Well, again, I think it's an exciting opportunity. I hope we're doing some real significant outreach. I know there's already a well-established network of agents and technical assistance organizations, consumer organizations, but that we really want to get the word out and keep you busy.
Yes.
Because home ownership is important, and so we want to try to encourage that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I support both of these initiatives.
Speakers on item 7, Lori Gray, Alex Visvatsky, thank you, Helmi, and Matthew Callahan. Good to see you.
How are you, gentlemen? Thank you. Lori Gay, NHS. Clearly, we're in support of this item. I think I have a couple of end games I want to mention. One is to get back in business with the city to get this work done because it's been missing for a long time, and we've all been on our own, and now we need to join together. The second is to use this as a beginning to leverage lots of money. And I think we should be doing 5,000 or 6,000 homeowners a year. It's LA. How do we get there? And putting self-interest aside, for better voters and more constituents who pay their taxes, I think the bottom line is there's no other way that families are able to get ahead as we see it in building their financial health and wealth and homeownership. So we want to work with the city, get started, get in here, get some work done, and then think through the banks, the employers, the unions. There's so much opportunity, and I hope we can see us moving ahead and figuring out the outreach that's the right thing.
Okay. Alex? Okay. Matthew Callahan. Alisa Soria. And Rosa Amaya.
Good afternoon. I am a lender. I have been working with the city for the past 17 years, so all this money for the low income and moderate income I've gone through, and I think it's a very positive use of the funds. And like we mentioned before, homeownership is very important.
Yes.
It brings stability to the house. I mean, all day we're talking about rent control and renters, and I think this portion is very important to maintain good households.
Yes.
Thank you.
Good neighborhoods.
Good neighborhoods.
Yes, good afternoon. My name is Rosa Amaya with Boston Private. I'm one of the approved lenders on City of LA's program for the past 3 years, and they have done a wonderful program put together to provide information to the homeowners, not only with the process, but also choosing the right borrowers, helping them meet the guidelines that they have. So it's a great program. I'm for it. We know we'll be able to create more homeowners with this assistance. As they mentioned earlier, affordable prices are going up, and we see how hard it is for some of our hardworking families to be able to purchase a house, having to access so much of their own assets, and getting some assistance definitely will help them acquire a good home. Thank you.
I had a question for staff, or maybe this is for NHS. Just personal experience. Years and years and years and years ago, when my wife and I went to buy a house, we assumed that we couldn't afford it, so we went through one of these programs. And the process of going through the program actually put us in the position where we could buy a house without the program. But without that, without the existence of the program, I don't think we would have just assumed that we couldn't do it. Do you all keep track of everybody who goes through the program, what they end up doing, where they end up buying, how long they stay, that kind of thing?
So our programs require that they attend homebuyer education.
Exactly.
So presently we have 10 agencies that are all HUD-approved housing counseling agencies, and they're very important because they help the home buyers to learn about Home Buying 101, the lending process, and navigating through the purchasing process, but also to prevent them for sustainable home ownership. So HCID doesn't know exactly how many home buyers or families go through education, but I'm sure we could get that information from the housing counseling agencies. But that is why we require it, not only to prepare them for home ownership, but also so they could learn the process and what they can borrow. And many times they can buy a home without our assistance.
That would be great to know.
Okay.
All I was going to add, thank you. All I was going to add was, since we're in the business of being neighborhood-based, we want to know where everybody is all the time and how they're improving and how their lives change. Because otherwise, I'm selling smoke, right?
Exactly.
And so we have created a program called We're in the Neighborhood, WIN. And WIN keeps up with people and invites them back and all their friends and family members. That's why word of mouth is still our biggest referral source. And so getting people into the funnel, they come out, you have a successful story where you didn't need the money, but the education mattered. Education is as key as the loan they buy or get. And so I think we want to make sure families are okay. We've had 3 foreclosures in 33 years.
Wow.
3. And every one of them should have been out of that house.
Lori,
Because they didn't want to do right.
how do we go from your 500 to 5,000 a year?
The leverage, you guys are used to me on that. And I think you've got private employers. Your influence is bigger than ours will ever be, right? And it's how do I work with Gloria and her team and my team to figure out how we go to people jointly on behalf of both of us. And certainly the lending community will just take the first mortgages if we aren't careful. I love them, but they're crazy. And so we have to look out ahead of who are the people who should join. Every private entity that works in this city that's got an employee base of 50 or more is an easy one that we should talk to. And with the leveraging that's done, it's usually matching savings. So if an employee saves $5,000, they can be matched up to $15,000 or $25,000. Those programs are not new. We're just bringing them back. And I think if we can do that, working with the banking system, they have their own programs. There's a lot that can be done. And I've joked with Gloria, she's at 5 to 7 deals a month. I said, I need to add 0 to you, girl. How do we do it? And so there's all these networks we want to bring to the city. She can only have so much staff. We get it. But you can't do it by yourselves. And I think there's a whole network of providers who'd be happy to help. We're just getting started. And you should require us in a nice way to be open to all that stuff. And I think that we are. And so we'll plan what we can, and Helmi's leading now as well, and we look forward to it. But I think the money part is very simple, and it's getting to the private sector and encouraging them that if their employees own their homes, they're going to work because they got bills to pay. And the mobility factor reduces to almost 0 because they own their home. And we then have to be creative, last thing, about the modeling, which, Councilman, we've talked some about, both of us, all of us really. It's different types of housing product because all the single-family standalone stuff, I mean, that's a thing of the past now. And we have to figure out how to build it. That's why some of us showed up on the linkage fee. But there's 10 ways to find money, not just one.
Right.
And I think if we can figure out other building modalities, including community land trusts, which wasn't always our favorite. But I got to think about it now because things are way too expensive, and we need to go up and not just out on how we build.
You know, if we could go 10 times that could have an impact on this ratio of what we're 35 to 65.
Oh, it's awful.
Right.
It's really awful. And we should be targeting at least 50%. How do we do that? And I think it's the money and it's the product. And I've told you before, I'm honest about it, we're doing a lot of building in Compton, and it's not because it's cheap. It's because there's a will to think a little bit differently, and they're smaller, so, you know. But I think we can do that in this city, and this is our first love, all of us. So I just want to see how we can get started. I think we're on a good path. It took us a while. But this is the way to begin, and then we shouldn't stop talking. Your staff are all technical experts. Let us sit down and let us work with the housing department. They need our support. They really do. And so we're grateful. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Move it. Move this forthwith.
Forthwith.
Adopt the CAO report. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, item 8, CO report relative to HSID's contracts regarding tenant outreach and education services.
Perfect timing. Is this the,
Thanks a lot, Paul.
is this the consensus item?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, this is a receive and file.
This is done. Yes.
Good afternoon. Roya Babazadeh from HSID. The item before you is as a result of transmittal, ED3 transmittal we processed to get authorization to exercise our option to extend for existing contracts for REAP and AMP tenant outreach and education services. To extend them for the second time and for the final amendment for 12 more months. To start from July 1st, 2017 and end on June 30th, 2018 for additional $150,000 per contract. The outreach and education services are essential for enforcement programs, especially for rent escrow account and utility maintenance program. Because of the education of tenants, we can increase the participation into the program and therefore increase the effectiveness of the program. Last year, we were able to bring over 10,700 units into compliance through a variety of our enforcement program, mainly through rent escrow account program. We appreciate your authorization to implement the final amendment.
Okay.
Andy Galancier's office. Our office concurs with the recommendations of the department.
Thank you. We have one public speaker on this before we receive and file. Mr. Millman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mike Millman, M-I-L-L-M-A-N. We're opposed to this. We don't think city funds should be earmarked or dedicated to paid, efficient, powerful, tough lobbyists like my friends behind me. That's a conflict of interest. It's illegal, Mr. Chair. Number two, they're not really outreaching. They're outreaching to tenants to find and fabricate and create more housing violations so they never, Mr. Chair, get out of REAP. And I'd give them $150,000 out of my family's pocket if one of them came up here and showed you a solution to find the vacancy factor, which should never have eluded housing, planning, and DWP. All of those departments. If I have a son, if he was running one of those departments in 20 minutes, my son could have delivered that number and it would have been authenticated. I'm always negative. This time I'm going to be positive. I support the Olympic bid. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, he gets the gold on that. Can we move receive and file?
Or do you approve the CO report?
Yes.
Approve
Thank
CO.
you. We don't. Receive and file.
Receive and file.
Yes, receive and file.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Item 8.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
We don't
Mr. Chair, item 9.
Yes.
HSID report relative to preserving, extending, amending, monitoring at-risk affordable housing covenants.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Franklin Campos. I'm a housing planning and economic analyst with the housing department. I'm joined today by Lemano Lot, finance development officer. We're part of the at-risk affordable housing preservation team that was established last year with the sole purpose of integrating the non-financial policy initiatives with the financial initiatives to preserve at-risk restricted affordable housing expiring in the next 5 years. The report before you today is HCLA's response to Councilmember Weezer's motion. So the submitted report outlines the various citywide proactive actions and strategies for protecting existing at-risk affordable housing covenants, rental assistance contracts, which are at risk of expiring in the next 5 years. I had a longer presentation for you, but I'm just going to go over the highlights of the report. And so just to highlight, during calendar year 2016 to present, the HCLA assisted in the preservation of 800 units of at-risk affordable housing within 16 properties. So these efforts were a combination of financial and non-financial initiatives. Just to highlight that over that same period, 11 properties with a total of 337 units of affordable housing covenants were terminated. Last year, we engaged in a very proactive initiative to identify and contact owners of at-risk properties. So we looked at more than 150 properties. That's about 4,400 units. Out of those, we ended up contacting just last year 70 property owners and management companies with approximately 2,100 units. Out of that number, 18 owners showed interest in extending affordability covenants.
18 out of how many?
18 out of 70. That was last year, so we're still continuing to do that work. So we're currently working with 4 properties. That's about 236 units of at-risk affordable housing. In terms of data, we continue, and our report will show that we continue to track and monitor the expiration of affordability restrictions in the city. So we're currently, our estimates indicate that there's approximately 11,700 units of at-risk affordable housing. Yes. 74% is federally subsidized. It continues to be at risk. It doesn't mean that it's going to terminate, but there's tenant protections in place, renewal mechanisms in place, but they're always at risk. 16% are city covenants, and the rest are state, subsidized by state programs, which have different restrictions as well. Also, our efforts include tracking the state notification requirements, which is a 1-year notice to residents from the owner when they're anticipating to terminate affordability restrictions. In this effort, we're currently working and tracking 14 properties. That's approximately 187 units at risk of expiring this year and next year. So we're currently basically working with the owners, providing the outreach. We saw the need for a local notice ordinance. So we're in the process of assessing a local notice ordinance that's going to mirror the state law, and that would establish a local enforcement mechanism to strengthen our affordable housing preservation efforts. We commend Councilman Cedillo for introducing this motion, and we will be reporting back to this committee with our recommendations. Lastly, we understand the importance of providing and conducting tenant outreach and education. We understand that we're not going to be able to preserve all the units, but over the last 10 years, the department has been working and actually conducting door-to-door outreach and education to tenants that live in these buildings. And so we're doing that very proactively. And the goal is to make sure that they understand what's happening to the buildings, what potentially is going to happen. So we're not doing that just for within the next year. We're looking at 5 years. And so we're combining those efforts, owners, tenants, but also with financing mechanisms. And we are in the process of, we just released an RFP to hire another consultant to help us with those efforts. And we're looking to contract possibly before the end of the year. In terms of the financing process, I will let Lomano just briefly provide you with some information.
One thing that we learned was emphasized to us as we continued out with our outreach. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Hello. One thing that was apparent to us, this is really an owner-driven process. Now, last year, Council District 1 allocated $7.9 million in CRA non-housing excess bond proceeds to be used primarily, no, not primarily, to entirely be used in Westlake and Pico Union 2. Councilman also committed $2 million of general fund money that we could use citywide. Now, what we are attempting to do is incentivize property owners to extend affordability in exchange for these funds based on existing city debt. Now, 3 strategies, basically. Loan extensions, interest forgiveness after a certain amount of principal pay down, and simple refinancing. Properties without debt provide us with no leverage, but there is potential for a buy down. During this year, we kind of learned a few lessons. There was very little interest, in fact, a lack of interest in a buy down of affordability due to the 55-year affordability requirements with CRA funds, primarily from profit-driven owners. The improvement in the rental market prompted many owners to opt out, and they still are. One thing that we've learned is that we really need to structure a financial program to address the challenges of preserving SRO hotels and those units. And we are currently working in allocating a portion of the $2 million in general funds to a project. Now, our next steps. Going forward, we're going to identify a citywide source of flexible funds to allow us to finance preservation properties and to assist buy downs with 5 to 55 years as opposed to just a 55-year term. Also, develop a finance model for SRO hotels, and creation of a city notification ordinance, which Franklin already spoke about, and explore or develop local incentives to promote the renewal of HUD rental assistance contracts for 5 to 20 years.
A few questions about this program. We thank you for your report. Very thorough and very good narrative form. Can you all describe the basic steps that you take to reach out to owners given the scope and scale? It seems like you've had a lot of contact, but just what actually do you do and how systematic is it?
Sure. We start out with our city databases, our city systems, and we contact owners by phone, follow up with letters, then emails, and we attempt to get them in the office for conferences, and then more follow-up.
And of that's very aggressive outreach. What's your success rate, I guess, at each step of the way? So how many people do you get what percentage do you get on the phone of that? What percentage do you get face-to-face with? I assume you have to get face-to-face with somebody to get a deal. So what's kind of the attrition rate?
In terms of the result, I think that it has most of the average has been through phone calls and letters, and what's happening is that what we're finding out is that when we call, since it's an owner-driven process, when we call, it would usually take 1 or 3 or 4 more calls, because when we're calling, it's like we're just selling something. So usually we say, well, I'm not planning, or my covenant doesn't expire this year, but it's maybe in 4 years, so let me think about it. So then basically we take note, we keep track, and then we call back again, and so we continue to work towards hopefully get them to the door.
In terms of phone bank success rate by number of phone calls, if you look at it's a continuous process. We call them, and then maybe months later they'll call us back, or if there's some interest, there's an email.
Right. I guess I'm asking over a year, if you have 10 targets, let's just take that as a number. 10 targets, of the 10 people, how many typically do you reach by phone? And then of that number, how many do you get into a meeting? And then how many can you get a deal with?
I can tell you, Councilman, actually your success rate is higher with the emails and the letter. The phone calls, some people just don't return your phone calls. we have accurate email information. That's the most successful medium, and of course letters.
Gotcha. And so that's good to know. So out of 10 targets, so you have 10 owners, right, that you're trying to get to. Given your best case scenario with outreach, typically how many of them can you end up, say over a 5-year period? How many of those do you expect to end up with an extension of the covenant?
Let's talk about the outreach first before we talk about extension of the covenant. I would say we'd hit 6 out of 10.
6 out of 10. Okay.
Get 6 people to call us back.
So you get in contact with 6.
Yeah.
That's a good rate.
Now, in terms of getting to extend, it depends on the type of owner. If you're talking about mission-driven people, they'll be extending, but it's not an impulse purchase. They're going to get tax credits and everything else that takes a longer period of time. If you're talking about for-profit,
Sure.
that's a little harder.
Okay. I'm just asking because we got a lot coming up, and it seems like your program is going to have to go into hyperdrive with 11,000 going up. And so I guess one, do you have recommendations for us for how we can be helpful in helping you all confront that challenge?
Well, as I said, our next steps to identify a citywide source of flexible funds. General fund would be great, but any source that's flexible that allows us to go from 5 years to a longer period of time.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, Mr. Kretz.
I have magically replaced it.
All look alike.
And looking at this.
By that I mean you legislators.
Well, we both fit that category.
I resemble that, I got it.
Looking at this chart, this looks like disastrous numbers. Except for me, in my district, we're not impacted very much, but my concern is obviously citywide. How do you even get people to agree to it? I mean, are they, you said mission-driven, are they people that built the affordable housing?
Yes.
And they still want to provide it, but
Yes.
they'd have to be able to afford to do that?
They're in the business of providing affordable housing, and they had a covenant that's going to expire, and they need additional cash to make improvements to the properties. They're already considering resyndicating, getting a bond deal, or getting tax credits, so it's a natural. It makes sense with them.
And folks that are just looking for the money, do we have anything to offer them?
What are we doing here?
The for-profit folks that may not have a connection to the mission and
I got that.
are looking to get out.
Yeah, we can
from under?
extend debt or refinance if they're interested. But that's a harder segment of the market because those owners are considering legacy issues. They're just looking at the market. Many of them have been there a long time, and they're thinking, what am I going to leave to my kids? And that's one of the common responses I get. It's like, I did this for a number of years, and now it's time to think about things a little differently because the market's changed, and we have family members, and we run into this all the time where it's a family decision. Well, I've got to think about my grandkids. I've got a living trust, and I want to do something with this and put the property in that. So that's why it's a little harder with the mission-driven ones, with the for-profit owners. And that's why you need funding that's a little more flexible. Maybe if we could offer them a 5-year covenant, they might consider it. But 55 years, it could be a bit.
Well, there's probably no reason in those cases to stick to 55 years. I agree with you. That's a great idea to offer a much shorter period of time that may still be appealing.
Yeah.
Do we ever look at purchasing any of these buildings, and can we afford to make that kind of offer?
Well, the funding in the process is centered on buying down affordability as opposed to purchasing because we wouldn't have enough money to purchase these buildings. So maybe we can incentivize people just to come back into the program for 5, 10, 15, or 20 years. And now when you talk about purchasing or doing something like that, that is done through the development section.
But what about facilitating a purchase? So, if facilitating a purchase by a land trust, for example, or another mission-driven entity.
I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, we've worked towards facilitating sales, purchases from an owner a for-profit or small investor to a mission-driven organization. But so far, we haven't been successful because they've been getting offers that they just couldn't refuse.
Got it.
And also, I mean, this is why the notification and tracking the notification, having our own ordinance, it makes sense because there's built-in mechanisms to provide notification to other qualified entities, which are a lot of the nonprofits. So they're being provided with a notice of opportunity to submit an offer to purchase. And so that would trigger the conversation with an owner that is willing to sell. So this is why we track those notices, just to see where the opportunities are in case that we don't know, they're not telling us that they're planning on selling. So.
Any chance we could use Measure HHH funds to purchase any of these buildings?
Arguably.
Rather than having
Possibly
to
the linkage
build
fee.
fresh and go through all the steps and
linkage fee would probably be-
expense.
Yes, but that wouldn't necessarily be a straight preservation, small transaction. Yes, through our development bureau, yes. I'm sure something they'll be considering. But
No, it might not be ideal, because the ideal would be just to extend it with the same tenants, et cetera, et cetera. But given no better choice, might we look at some of those with the right opportunity?
Oh, yes.
So we'll ask them to do that. So why don't you look at that? We need a robust response from you in maybe 60 days that lays out what other cities are doing. This is devastating. I'm surprised the room's not packed for this item by itself. We had a lot of people here earlier, and right here we're looking at 11,000 units gone within 5 years. That's like 55,000 people out of being displaced. That's extraordinary. So we need to figure out some strategies that deal with this. Linkage fee gets us 400 to 700 units. I mean, we're talking 11,000 units here. I mean, this is, one step forward and half a dozen backwards. So, can you get us what other people are doing to preserve, to extend covenants, to finance, to rehab, to purchase, to partner, to do all the things that government entities can do so that we can make sure people remain in these units.
Yes.
Yeah, you got that. 60 days, you guys got that, right? Let your imagination be your limits. Don't put everything out, then we'll look at it. Okay?
Mr. Chair, that concludes the regular agenda. Shall we adjourn and go to
Yes.
special?
Let's do that.
Okay, special agenda item 1, HCID report regarding clarifying housing inspections for the systematic code enforcement program.
Okay. We're in special meeting item 1?
Correct.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Daniel Gomez, Housing and Community Investment Department. In particular, I'm Director of the Code Enforcement Division. And consistent with prudent code administration, what we're doing is reviewing the housing code. It's Chapter 16, part of the municipal code. And what you have before you are recommendations for certain amendments to the code that will clarify the right of entry requirements for inspectors. It'll remove ambiguities that have caused staff problems.
Okay. Mr. Kritz, Mr. Price.
Neither of us have anything to say.
The shadows are long, Mr. Chair.
Yes, and as is the hour. We want to find the recommendation, find the adoption of the accompanying ordinances categorically exempt from the provisions of CEQA, and we want to adopt a report and approve draft ordinance.
John White, City Clerk. There's a ordinance prepared by the Housing Department on the report. You can request an ordinance from the City Attorney at this time. There was no ordinance submitted by the City Attorney's Office.
You would recommend requesting an ordinance from the City Attorney in order to have the City Attorney err and submit.
Perfect.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't have said it better.
Perfect.
Thank you. The hour is late. And with that,
Thank you.
Mr. Clerk, that concludes the agenda.
That concludes the agenda, and I think we have a motion to adjourn. No objection. Thank you. Lord.
I didn't look at the same